Chapter 1074. Who else? General Shunsei asked. His sharp eyes looked at all the civil and military officials. The holy sword in his hand was sharp and sharp, just like the elimination list, wide and long. This contemptuous and domineering attitude made Empress even angrier. Well, General Shunsei is in a hurry to eliminate dissidents and cover the sky with one hand. Sun Lang shook his head. Empress's prejudice against you is too deep. I'm just counting the list of those who oppose this proposal. After all, those who oppose this proposal don't need to be included in the joint investigation team, right? Empress sneered. Isn't this eliminating dissidents? Sun Lang sincerely said, it's not like that. I think that those who oppose this proposal are the most loyal defenders of the dignity of the royal family, just like Empress. I personally understand their feelings and respect their position. They regard His Majesty as a family closer than their own father. Their filial piety is so moving that they would rather die than let the honor of the royal family be tarnished. Even if I only flipped through one page of the internal palace archives, in their eyes, it's worse than killing their whole family. They're like dog fans, so since they're so loyal and filial, inviting them to join this joint investigation team is such a cruel thing. They'll definitely cry and scream, and their hearts will be broken. Although I'm cruel and merciless and killed Lingmu Li without hesitation, I still have a heart of compassion and conscience. I won't do anything to the meritorious officials, and I won't force others to do things they don't want to do. After all, they're loyal officials and the greatest defenders of the royal family's honor. They don't want His Majesty to be offended in the slightest. These people are true patriots, and they deserve to be remembered and respected. He looked at Li Jiansheng with a pleasant expression and said gently, Isn't that right, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince? Please watch carefully. Those who speak out in opposition are all great loyalists. You must treat them well. His Highness the Crown Prince immediately nodded and said, I understand. Although these officials who are loyal to my father are a little old-fashioned and pedantic, their loyalty is not fake. The royal family will thank them for their efforts and persistence, and I will keep them in my heart and remember them carefully. It was a feeling of quietly making a list and settling the score in the future. Everyone felt a chill. This was obviously a threat. The threat not only came from Shunsei General Sun Lang, but also from Prince Chengcheng, the future monarch. The current situation was very clear. Sun Lang's actions was like a declaration of war. He wanted to take advantage of His Majesty's unconscious after being assassinated to strike and completely cut the current emperor's throne off. Sun Lang, so this was actually a matter of picking a side. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince's meaning was very clear. Let's see who wants to go against me. If you want to oppose, you can. If you want to support His Majesty's interests, you can also do that. But you better pray to the gods and Buddhas and do your best to stop me from inheriting the throne. Or else, The situation was stronger than the person. It was not that there were no officials who dared to oppose Sun Lang, but there were very few who dared to oppose Sun Lang and the Crown Prince at the same time. If you offended the current powerful officials, you might be able to rely on your political allies and your own strength to support yourself. But if you offended the future monarch as well, it would be too exciting. So, for a moment, no one spoke. Empress's sharp, cold laughter echoed in the court, full of ridicule and hatred. She was going all out. Moreover, she was the current mother of the country. Her status was there, so she did not have to do things according to the rules of the outside court. After all, she did not have a good relationship with the outside court, and if she investigated carefully, the outside court officials could not do anything to her. She said coldly, Well, no one objects. In such a big court, there is not a single loyal official. At this moment, everyone has made the right choice. Our loyalty is not to a specific emperor, but to this empire, this country. Just like the Battle of Tianyuan, we're not only fighting to protect the emperor's throne and rule. We are fighting for this country and the people of the world. Only such loyalty can be called loyalty. Sun Lang said indifferently. But Empress is a woman in the palace. Wealth and honor are tied to His Majesty. She does not know joy or sorrow. She does not know the country or the people. You will not understand this principle. He ignored the mother of the country and turned around. Since no one objects, I announce that we will now nominate the members of the joint investigation team. First, I will name a few candidates. There is no need to nominate. They will be directly selected. The first person is me. The second person is His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince. He will be the supervisor and gatekeeper of the entire investigation process. The third person is General Tensei. He will be the representative of the interests of the royal family. The fourth person is Bao Shiren. He will be responsible for ensuring the fairness and truth of the entire investigation process. It's your turn. This is an important matter of the country, and it concerns the entire world. I hope that everyone will have a sense of duty and responsibility. Don't be hypocritical and humble, because I will take it seriously. Do you want to eat the emperor's cake? Do you want to know what the emperor does in private? If you want to, then come. He has put everything there. Let's go snatch it. After a moment of silence, the clamor sounded. This was indeed an irresistible temptation. The most important thing was that since they did not object, it meant that they had taken the risk of offending the royal family. Since they had paid the price, they had to get back the cost. Empress said loudly, "I don't agree." Sun Lang said calmly, "So what? The outer court has its own rules. Empress is only listening to the emperor's orders. Even if His Majesty came personally, he would have to discuss it with us. How can we reject it with just one word? Times have changed, Empress. Now, the outer court is discussing matters. Please remain calm. Otherwise, please leave." Empress gritted her teeth and stared at Sun Lang. She could no longer hide her resentment. She looked at the civil and military officials in the court, at the calm Empress, and at the slightly guilty Crown Prince. In the end, she smiled coldly. Very good, very good. Sun Lang, don't think that you have already won." Sun Lang said softly, "The heavens still exist, and justice will prevail. Do you believe me, Empress?" Empress left in a huff. The first internal court hearing in nearly 100 years ended in such a way. Sun Lang stood with his hands behind his back. He did not have a trace of satisfaction. He had won too many victories in his life. Empress was just a puppet. Defeating this kind of opponent did not bring him any joy. A few important ministers who were on good terms with Sun Lang came over to chat with him with smiles on their faces. They all had extremely high statuses and had their lackeys shouting for them in everything they did. It was a given that they would enter the investigation team. "Commander of War, how impressive." They joked. Sun Lang smiled reservedly. No, I also broke out in a cold sweat. The important officials were all curious. "What? There's something that makes you afraid?" Sun Lang shrugged. "I was afraid that when I was arguing with Empress, she would suddenly open her eyes in anger and point at me with a trembling finger. Then she would spit out a mouthful of blood and die. How wrong would that be? I would have to bear the blame for Empress' death." I was really trembling in fear, ready to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation at any moment. This was not a joke. The emperor had the devil's help and had deep control over the imperial army. Bai Yue's matter did not need to be mentioned. The Mars swordsman Wu Hui had also almost encountered this kind of danger. If the emperor or the devil did this to Empress and made Empress die on the spot, then Sun Lang would have to face the awkward situation of cursing Empress to death. It would also be recorded in the history books and talked about by future generations. Not only that, it was estimated that thousands of years later, it would be made into a TV series by future generations. Moreover, because the actors' acting skills were too good and the plot was extremely classic, it would be made into all kinds of ghastly videos by a group of bored and twisted fans. In the end, it would develop into a sadomasochistic love between Empress and a powerful official. It was too scary. So at that time, although Sun Lang acted as if it was nothing and displayed the demeanor of a powerful official, the string in his heart was really stretched taut at all times. Once the Empress showed any signs of pain, he would immediately rush up to save her. Of course, he could save her. After all, Wu Hui had been saved. That day, the twisted power of the sacred fire sword caused the dying Wu Hui's blood to surge wildly and his spirit to be stimulated. thus awakening the vitality in his body. If the half-baked sacred fire sword could do this kind of thing, it should not be too difficult to save Empress with the power of the Great Protection. Of course, it was not difficult. After all, Wu Hui only needed to lightly touch him, and he could return to work. If Empress was in danger, he was prepared to directly perform cardiac compressions and artificial respiration. He was not bragging, but if the power of the Great Protection was at full power, even if you're Mount Fuji, you would have to give me a blow-up, let alone a mere empress. It was just that the situation would be a little out of control. But it did not matter, because Empress was also a woman, and a woman who held grudges. After she was saved, she would probably realize that it was her husband who had done this to her. Then, her love would turn into hatred, and she would turn the spearhead of hatred to the emperor. Sun Lang could even take advantage of this and enter. Stop. Although Empress had taken good care of herself and could be said to be peerlessly beautiful, she was still too old. Sun Lang was not the kind of pervert who would be in love with an 18 or 19-year-old woman. In short, General Shen's smile hid merit and fame. He was running a train in his head, but when these words fell into the ears of the ministers, they had a different meaning. Empress was a little naive, and she had been fooling around in the inner palace all day long. Her structure and methods were also a little lacking. However, she was still the mother of a dynasty. She had a lot of resources and cultivation methods to back her up, and her martial art cultivation was extraordinary. Moreover, she was in charge of the inner palace empress seal, the Wanfeng Tianzhong, and had the protection of the top imperial army. Such a martial arts expert would of course be beaten to death by Sun Lang. But how could she be scolded to death by Sun Lang? Obviously, Sun Lang was implying something. He was implying that it was a framing. This, the joking minister forced a smile and said, "Commander of war, you must be joking." Sun Lang smiled indifferently. With your well-informed information, how could you not know how Qi Lianyan died? Speaking of which, a few days ago, the palace guard swordsman Wu Hui of the Mars Sword Palace almost died. Does anyone know about this? My lords, you must be more careful in the future. The more he was so secretive and implying something, the more surprised and doubtful everyone was. They were about to ask more when footsteps came from the side. General Tensei and His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince came together. Empress was still calm. Over the years, she had developed the domineering and confident aura of an emperor. She did everything with an air of magnanimity and calmness. In comparison, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince next to her was much weaker. At least in front of his sister, Li Jinxing's eyes were still filled with fear and even restraint. After all, Empress had put too much pressure on him in the past years. Empress looked at everyone. My lords, I have something to say to Sun Lang. Everyone's smile became a little ambiguous. They cupped their hands and left. At the same time, they gave Sun Lang a look that all men understood. You offended Her Majesty Empress today. You were a little impulsive. Empress said straightforwardly, Grandmother had a good impression of you before. Now that Empress went back and said that the joint investigation of the royal family was spread, I'm afraid that Her Majesty's impression of you will drop to the bottom in an instant. Sun Lang smiled. Do you think I care about that? Empress was the emperor's wife, and Her Majesty was the emperor's mother. The glory and status of these two women were closely related to the emperor. There was no need for a united front at all. Since they would fall out sooner or later, why should he care about what they thought? Empress saw through Sun Lang's subtext immediately. She shook her head slightly and continued. That's not what I meant. The harem and the court are two different worlds. Men are in charge of external affairs, and women are in charge of internal affairs. Even as the emperor, he has no right to manage the harem nominally, because that is Empress's responsibility. So you just offended the two women with the highest status in the harem, and the emperor is recuperating in the harem right now. Empress said, Empress is in charge of the harem, and she can easily do some things. She also doesn't need your permission to carry out her will in the harem. For example, finding capable people in the court to treat His Majesty's injury. Sun Lang nodded and said, I know. Do you really know? Empress's eyes became sharp. It means that if your guess is right, and this assassination is really the Emperor's scheme, then Empress will be able to push out a mysterious person out of nowhere. As long as this mysterious person cures His Majesty's injury, his background will not be a problem at all, and the Emperor will be in charge of the court again. The advantage you gain today will be greatly reduced. Have you ever thought about this problem? Sun Lang asked back. Then if I didn't offend Empress today, would this not have happened? Empress pursed her lips and did not speak. At the very least, if the Emperor is forced to wake up and return to the stage, then his previous plan will fail, and I won't lose anything. Sun Lang said calmly, what I have to do next is to chop him a few more times before he can't help but jump up. Your Highness, are you ready? Chapter 1075. Your Highness, are you ready? His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince glanced at Empress Tensei subconsciously. Then he puffed out his chest and said in the most dignified and confident tone possible, I am ready. Sun Lang nodded. Good. I have two things that you need to do immediately. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince was slightly surprised. He glanced at Empress again and felt a little unhappy. Didn't you break up with my sister? Did you really get back together with her? Are you guys serious? Hey, don't be like this. You're my teacher, and I'm your student. We're allies, but this woman is my enemy. You have to be clear about this. I know you had a good relationship with her back then, and you cooperated with her very well, but that's all in the past. Sun Lang glanced at him as if he had seen through His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince's thoughts. The Emperor is the king of the empire. He rules this country with the dignity and tradition of imperial power. His majesty and power come from two aspects. The first is his legitimate status, and the second is his own power. If an emperor wants to ensure his control over the country and the court, he can't do without either, and what we need to attack and weaken is the direct power that the emperor has. The imperial palace is the heart of the empire. It is the most important place in the world. It is protected by the imperial guards and the optimized defense system of the imperial army built by the imperial treasury for hundreds of years. It also continues to collect the best martial arts in the world and cultivate a large number of strong people. It is really the best martial arts holy land in the world. The imperial treasury is the functional organization that manages the private property and daily affairs for the imperial family. It has an even more important role because the imperial treasury is under the jurisdiction of the imperial treasury. The imperial army is the foundation of a strong country. The production process and system of the imperial army are firmly controlled by the imperial treasury, ensuring the stability of the empire and the imperial family. These two are the emperor's left and right arms. They are indispensable. Thus, they're also the places we must attack. He looked at Li Jiansheng and said with a smile, in our struggle against the emperor, these two places are the most important strategic points of support. They are places that must be fought for. With your current strength, can you take them down? Can you defend it? His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince was speechless. Of course, he had the bad habit of being indecisive and slow to react, and he was always criticized by the two great strategists. However, this also showed that he had a strong point, and that was that he knew how to act tough. He could see the situation clearly and accept it quickly. Given Li Jianxing's current power and skills, it was far from enough for him to control both the Ministry of Finance and the Inner Palace at the same time. After all, before this, he did not have much ambition to fight for the position of Crown Prince, and there were not many people in the court who thought highly of him. Now that he had just become Crown Prince, his wings were far from full, and he did not have the help of the Emperor. Other than the title of Crown Prince, his actual power had not increased by leaps and bounds. If he wanted to use his own power to take down these two pieces of cake, he would certainly be stuffed to the point of bursting. Furthermore, just as Sun Lang had said, even if he could take it down, he would not be able to defend it. The Inner Palace was one thing, and the foreign officials could not reach into it no matter what. However, the Ministry of Finance was a large piece of cake. The imperial family had many mines, gardens, parks, lakes, shops, and other industries under its name. Each year, It brought in an incalculable amount of income. Furthermore, it raised many capable people. More importantly, the Sacred Implement Bureau was under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Finance. After all, the Imperial Army was the foundation of a powerful country. Whoever controlled the Imperial Army could win the hearts of all the warriors in the world and win the future. In these years of court struggles, the most intense point of contention between the imperial power and the officials was to take the Sacred Implement Bureau back into the country and let the court operate and manage it. Of course, the successive emperors had guarded it to the death and did not give in at all. The foreign officials had never been able to gain an advantage. However, now that the emperor was unconscious, if Li Jiansheng held the Ministry of Finance in his hands, it would be like a 3-year-old child holding gold ingots and swaying them in front of a group of robbers. They would certainly rise up and attack him. It would be strange if he could defend it. The Crown Prince understood this point, but he was still not reconciled. His heart moved, and he said respectfully, "I can't take it or defend it, but teacher is here." What he meant was that he was willing to take out a portion of the benefits to satisfy his teacher. It would be like paying a protection fee and asking this fearless general's son to hold the fort for him. This was because his fear and psychological shadow of Empress was too great. He would rather share the enormous benefits of the Ministry of Finance with Sun Lang than see the power of Tensei Province increase again. Sun Lang still shook his head in disapproval. "It's not good for me to interfere in the Imperial Palace. After all, it's not good for a foreign official to control the Imperial Palace. It will damage the reputation of the Imperial Palace. Furthermore, why should I interfere in the inner palace? Do I want to sleep in the Emperor's bed?" The Crown Prince pretended not to hear the last sentence. After interacting with Sun Lang for a few days, he had gradually developed a big heart and could selectively ignore some crazy words. As for the Ministry of Finance, Sun Lang said faintly, "If I get it, that side." He pursed his lips, and the civil and military officials on the other side quarreled, none of them giving in. The people on the other side won't be able to sit still. Although they seem to have reached an agreement now, they're all very shrewd. Once my power and influence grow too much, they will have other thoughts. The situation is changing. Our dispute with the Emperor has reached a certain intensity. We should try to get more help. At least, we shouldn't increase the number of enemies. At this time, my hand has stretched too far, and it will easily cause problems. If they have other thoughts, they will be persuaded by the Emperor and become our enemy." The Crown Prince was stunned for a moment, and then he said emotionally, "Teacher, you are really thinking about the big picture and have no selfish motives. I'm very grateful. I will not forget your contribution." Sun Lang patted on the shoulder. "Also, you're going to be the Emperor. The Ministry of Finance is the private property of the Imperial family. The Sacred Implement Bureau is the source of the Imperial family's strength. You have to understand this. You can't let it fall into the hands of foreign officials. Now, you have to drag the Empress into it. At least it will still stay in the hands of the Imperial family. Do you understand?" The Crown Prince was really moved this time. That was the Sacred Implement Bureau. With the Sacred Implement Bureau, it meant that there would be an endless supply of Imperial army. The Imperial army could allow warriors to exert more power. It was the true core of the 6 armies of the Empire. Its significance to the entire country was obvious. However, Sun Lang could give it up so decisively. And all of this was for the sake of the stability of his student's position as the Emperor. He was on the verge of tears. He held Sun Lang's hand and said sincerely, "In the future, when I become the Emperor, you will be the Emperor's preceptor. In this life, I will never betray you. If I violate this oath, may I die under arrows." Sun Lang said gently, "You are much stronger than your father. I believe in you." Empress Tensei did not say anything. The imperial tutor instructed his student a few more words and told him to act quickly. The Crown Prince nodded and quietly left through the side door of the Golden Palace. A minister saw him and asked, "Where is His Highness going?" Sun Lang stopped him with a smile. "The Crown Prince is worried about His Majesty. He has something to do." "Sir, you don't have to worry. I am his teacher. You can ask me about the joint investigation team." The Crown Prince left the Golden Palace and urgently summoned his confidants to the palace for a meeting. Peju and the others were not qualified to enter the palace because their ranks were not high enough or they were the Crown Prince's personal aides. They could only wait outside. Now that they heard the Crown Prince's summons, they rushed over as quickly as possible. They were Li Jianqing's most trusted people. As soon as Peju and Wang Ku arrived, they began to ask about the Crown Prince's well-being. After all, they had quarreled with him for more than 10 years and had developed feelings for him. They had a sense of duty and responsibility to protect a mentally handicapped child. The first thing the two said when they raised their heads reflected their different personalities. Peju said, "His Highness should consider promoting us. After all, we are waiting outside for a meeting in the Golden Palace. His Highness doesn't have anyone to speak up for him in court." Wang Gue asked, looking at His Highness's expression. Today's meeting was daunting, but not dangerous. Did Sun Lang show his power again? When the Crown Prince thought of Sun Lang's love for him, he was touched. He sighed and said, "Grand Preceptor Crown Prince, you're an honest person. I really can't understand why Imperial Father and Tian Su would bully such an honest person." The two strategists looked at each other and reached a rare consensus. His Highness was fooled. What a joke. An honest man? If Sun Lang was an honest man, there wouldn't be any sly people in the world. Their hearts pounded, and then they asked anxiously, afraid that His Highness would say something humiliating. After all, the situation was stronger than the person. Sun Lang's power was overwhelming. Even if he tricked His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince to the point that he didn't even have his underwear left, Peju and the others couldn't do anything about it. The Crown Prince was very moved and recounted what had happened in the imperial court. It was said that the general was like a jade pillar that supported the sky, not yielding an inch to the Empress' attack, and defeated the other side. Moreover, he even counterattacked and won a complete victory. Peju and Wang Gue looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. "He's so quick-witted, and he's even a general," Peju said in a low voice. "No wonder he's the #1 in Tianyuan. Just thinking about how we might have to face such an opponent in the future makes me feel uneasy." The Crown Prince then talked about the mission that Sun Lang had given him. In the end, he said, a kind man. Peju thought for a moment and shook his head. "Your Highness, this matter isn't that simple. Sun Lang isn't that kind. He didn't reach out to the Imperial Palace probably because he didn't want to be in the limelight and attract trouble. After all, his priority now isn't to fight for power, but to make sure that His Majesty can't make a comeback," Jianqing argued, but he did give up the chance to take control of the Sacred Weapons Directorate. He even said that he would let the Sacred Weapons Directorate remain in the hands of the imperial family. This is out of kindness. Otherwise, Peju sighed. But his intention was obviously to let Empress Tensei touch the imperial palace. Although I don't know how he reconciled with Empress, his intention is very clear. Even if you succeed the throne in the future, you will still have to face a strong challenge from Empress. If you want to suppress Tensei province and take back control of the imperial palace, you will have to continue relying on Sun Lang's help. And if Empress wants to fight against you, you will also have to rely on Sun Lang's help. This is the way of checks and balances. At this point, Peju smiled bitterly. He actually used the Emperor's art of balance on the Emperor. This is what it means to be able to cover the sky with one hand and overturn the court. The Crown Prince's expression gradually became unsettled. He still didn't want to believe it. He hadn't developed a suspicious personality. "But that is the Sacred Artifact Supervisor," he said. He should know the value and significance of the Sacred Artifact Supervisor. Even if he had such intentions, he wouldn't allow Empress to touch the Sacred Artifact Supervisor. Peju frowned. "That is indeed the case. I don't understand it either. Sun Lang is too willing." Wang Gue, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said, "Unless..." The two of them looked over. "Unless what?" Wang Gue suddenly shivered and shook his head. "No, that's impossible. This is too absurd." Peju asked suspiciously, "What?" Wang Gue changed the topic. "It's a baseless assumption. It's so crazy that it's unbelievable. Let's not talk about this anymore. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince, Regardless of what Sun Lang's intentions are, he's right about one thing. Right now is a good opportunity to meddle in the internal affairs of the palace. Since we've chosen Sun Lang, we can't hesitate anymore. Let's start with the 9 gates of the Emperor. Sun Lang will cooperate with us. At the same time, in the Golden Palace. They definitely won't be able to guess why you're so generous. Empress laughed coldly beside Sun Lang. The sacred weapons supervisor, the manufacturing process of the Imperial Army, the forging techniques of the Imperial Army, the most important cornerstone of the Empire. It's a top secret that all the countries want to know at all costs. She turned her head to look at the side of Sun Lang's face. You handed it over to me so easily. Don't mention eldest Imperial brother. All of the civil and military officials will be shocked. Sun Lang said affectionately, because I believe in you. Empress was completely unmoved. She had seen this level of acting many times in the past and had long since become immune to it. She laughed coldly and said, You believe in me? Sun Lang continued affectionately, Yes, I'm doing this for your own good. Otherwise, why don't you and the Crown Prince switch places? You'll be in charge of the internal affairs of the palace, and he'll be in charge of the Imperial Palace. Empress snorted coldly. Of course, she did not want to get close to the palace. She wanted to stay far away from the Emperor. Perhaps it was because of the shadow of that night, or perhaps it was because of a woman's intuition. But the problem was, if she did not want to get close to the palace, would Li Jiansheng be willing to stay away from the palace? Of course not. General Tensei said, You're just afraid. You're afraid that when my brother takes over the sacred weapons supervisor, he'll find out that the Empire can no longer create an Imperial army. You're afraid that he'll trace it back to you and reveal what you've done. So, you can only give me the Imperial Palace and let me keep the secret for you. Sun Lang smiled. And you can only keep this secret from me. Empress said slowly, That's not necessarily true. No, it's definitely true. Sun Lang said, Just like how your father has never dared to reveal it. We hold the button to destroy each other because what he wants to do is much more excessive than what I do. Empress narrowed her eyes. What do you know? General Tensei only smiled. Control the Imperial Palace and then investigate it yourself. See it yourself. Find the answer yourself. Trust me, you'll be shocked. Chapter 1076. Facing the morning sun, Empress stepped out of the gate of heaven influence. Those who left with Empress were the officials of Tensei Province who were qualified to attend court meetings. The others waited outside and went up to greet the manor head as soon as he came out. After everyone bowed, Shui Yuanjing said in a low voice, Your Highness, there was some trouble at the gate of heaven influence. The Imperial Tooth General was summoned away, and the eldest prince led his subordinates to give them a lecture. They were still not convinced that Li Jiansheng was the crown prince, and still called him the eldest prince in private. Empress nodded slightly. Eldest brother has started to take action. He wants to control the inner palace. Wei Zheng recounted what happened in front of the Golden Hall. When the officials heard that Sun Lang had done something big again, they all frowned with strange expressions. Yu Shernan said, With Sun Lang's support, it's not difficult to do this. If the eldest prince controls the inner palace, with his status as regent, he can take over the imperial city and prevent the imperial edict from leaving the palace. After all, he was a scholar and spoke more tactfully. Not only did the imperial edict not leave the palace, but Li Jiansheng and Sun Lang were in cahoots and controlled the inner palace. This was equivalent to holding the emperor in the palm of their hands. With Sun Lang's audacity and unscrupulous methods, it would be normal for an abdication edict to appear one day. Yu Shernan hesitated and advised again. Your Highness, you can't rely on luck. Sun Lang and Jiansheng have gained power. Once they gain a foothold, they will attack your Highness. For now, it's better to act now. Although Sun Lang has gained the upper hand this time, he has roared at the court and disrespected Empress. He has already shown his domineering attitude, and the ministers must be wary of him. Moreover, the current His Majesty hates Sun Lang deeply. Jiansheng was able to become the crown prince because of His Majesty's grace, but he colluded with Sun Lang. This is truly a disobedient and cruel act. As the saying goes, adversity reveals one's sincerity. If your highness can raise your arm and call for help at this time and fight against Sun Lang, his majesty will definitely be gratified in his eyes. At that time, it is still unknown who will inherit the throne. Many people showed signs of agreement. This was the normal operation. After all, Sun Lang and Empress were already like fire and water due to the incident at the Great Desolate Mountain. There was no possibility of reconciliation. As the saying goes, if you stick your head out, you'll still be stabbed. Therefore, it was better to step forward bravely and have a vigorous fight with Sun Lang. After all, there was no way back. It was still unknown who would emerge victorious. But when Empress heard these words, she had a different feeling in her heart. These loyal and devoted subordinates and subjects did not know that she had already broken off relations with the emperor. Just based on what she had seen and experienced that night, she would not have any expectations or hope for the emperor. She could feel the twisted, evil thoughts coming from the other party's heart. What was this evil thought? What did the emperor want to do to her? What kind of gaze did this sovereign, who was supported and revered by all the subjects, use to size up his most beloved daughter? She did not want to think about all of this in detail, or perhaps it was better to say that she did not dare to think too much about it, because once she thought about it, she would feel both psychological and physical discomfort. How could she hope that the emperor would change his mind and set up a new crown prince? Besides, she already had a new plan. "Brother Yu, there is something you do not know," Wei Zheng said. "Sun Lang may have other plans." Yu Shernan raised an eyebrow. "Plans?" Wei Zheng did not speak and turned to look at Empress. Empress was silent for a moment and then said, "Sun Lang wants to make the first move to gain the upper hand and force the emperor to accept it. Eldest brother has instructed him to control the inner palace and imperial court, and we will go to the imperial treasury." After a moment of silence, there was a rise and fall of cries of surprise. The imperial treasury was the private property of the royal family and the source of the palace treasury. It collected all the rare treasures in the world and managed the property and finances for the royal family. It was the royal family's money bag and the emperor's confidence to speak loudly to the foreign subjects. Most importantly, the Sacred Implement Bureau it managed was the only department in the empire that could create, maintain, and manage the imperial army. Its importance could be imagined. And now, Sun Lang had actually given this large piece of cake to Her Highness Empress. Everyone's gazes became very strange for a moment. It was a subtle feeling as if the boss and goddess had been taken by the same pig a second time. Their gazes revealed the same meaning. When did you all get together again? Zhang Sun Wuji was the first to jump out. He said loudly, "There must be something strange about this. How could Sun Lang be so kind? This must be his scheme." Yuan Fuji said calmly, "I have thought about it again and again, but I can't think of any scheme. But one thing is certain. Even if this piece of candy is mixed with poison, we have to try to eat it. Because the benefits here were too great. Regardless of just how valuable the wealth, talents, technology, and network of connections the Imperial Cavalier Palace had accumulated over hundreds of years, just the Sacred Artifact Supervisor alone was enough for Heavenly Policy Palace to fight for it with all their might. Everyone could see its value, and everyone understood just how great its strategic significance was. No one could refuse such benefits. Even the Heavenly Strategy sages, who had been on the battlefield for a long time and were cautious and meticulous, were no exception. But they were still worried about another thing. Why could Sun Lang give it up so easily? Someone tried to explain. Sun Lang is now in the limelight in the imperial court, and he has already attracted the vigilance and hostility of many big shots. The reason why many of them are restraining themselves is because they all hope that he will charge and break through the enemy lines and meet the imperial power. The big shots don't mind giving way to Sun Lang, and they don't mind sharing the cake with him. But if Sun Lang shows the bearing of a fierce and ambitious person who can overturn the imperial court and the common people, and shows excessive greed, it will inevitably lead to the counterattack of many forces. So he doesn't dare to reach out to the Ministry of Finance. because if he controls the Sacred Implement Bureau, he will cross the line that the big shots have drawn for him. For various reasons, Zhang Sun Wuji was very hostile to Sun Lang. He asked bluntly, "But he won't give the imperial treasury to us. There must be some trap in this." Du Kemming said, "Lord Zhang Sun, I understand your feelings, but this is a matter of the country. It's best not to mix in personal feelings. You said that there is a trap in this. Then I dare to ask, with Sun Lang's ability, what kind of trap will he bury in the imperial treasury for us to step into?" Zhang Sun Wuji was tongue-tied and couldn't say anything. Fang Xiao also said, "I can roughly guess Sun Lang's thoughts. He doesn't trust the first prince, Jiansheng, and is holding back. By giving the imperial treasury to us, he wants to use this opportunity to beat and weaken the first prince. After all, without the imperial treasury as a backing, the emperor won't have the confidence to speak and do things. He intends to balance the power." Yuan Shiji nodded and said, "I think so too. Then what should we do?" The wise men looked at each other and smiled. "Of course, we should take down the imperial treasury first." Then everyone looked at Empress, waiting for her to give the order. Admiral Tensei was silent. Her gaze was somewhat complicated, and she even felt that it was somewhat ironic and funny. In terms of wisdom and strategy, Fang Xiao and the others were all better than the young Zhang Sun Wuji. But even as smart and capable as they were, they couldn't guess Sun Lang's motive and reason for giving the imperial treasury to them. The only one who sensed that something was wrong was Zhang Sun Wuji. His suspicion came from his prejudice against Sun Lang. But he was the one who was right. Sun Lang, indeed, didn't have good intentions. The value of the imperial treasury wasn't as great as everyone imagined. As for the Sacred Implement Supervisor that everyone went crazy for, it became a hot potato of little value. The reason why Sun Lang let her take over the imperial treasury was because he wanted her to keep and control the secret. But she couldn't say anything about all this. She couldn't even refuse Sun Lang's suggestion. If this secret was discovered by outsiders, it would inevitably cause huge waves and even lead to the turmoil and destruction of this country. So, only she could control the imperial treasury. Only she could suppress the Sacred Implement Supervisor. Even if it was a bitter fruit, she could only force herself to swallow it. This should be retribution, right? She knew the truth, but she couldn't say it. She could only continue to do what she should do based on an inexplicable belief. She couldn't see the future, and she didn't know the result. Sun Lang had already predicted everything. He was taking revenge, and he was taking revenge bit by bit. He would never give up, and he wouldn't stop. This revenge had started early in the Great Bear Mountain. The Sacred Implement Supervisor, the most valuable and valued most in the Imperial Treasury, had actually lost its most important function. There was a problem with the production line of the Imperial Army, and the last and most important link had collapsed more than 2 years ago. Because in the Great Barren Mountain, Sun Lang, who had lost control, almost destroyed the Hutu divine sword. Since then, the extraterritorial divine sword obtained from the ancestor sky demon had lost the ability to create the imperial army. Sun Lang, who had done this, had committed the most serious crime in history, even more serious than killing the monarch. By killing the monarch, he had only buried the life of an emperor, but by destroying the Hutu divine sword, he had destroyed the powerful cornerstone of this country and the entire future of this country. Once this news leaked out, the entire empire would be in turmoil, and the wind and rain would sway. And Sun Lang would be nailed to the pillar of shame in history forever, and his name would go down in infamy for thousands of years. It should have been like this. But the emperor had been silent, and so had she. Just now, Sun Lang had said that he and the emperor had the button to destroy each other. He also said that what the emperor was doing was even more excessive. Was this a bluff, or was it true? What did he know? It had to be said that Sun Lang's last whisper in the Golden Palace had aroused Empress curiosity. Now that she and the emperor had broken off their relationship, the once close relationship between father and daughter had become cold and indifferent. Looking back on the past, there were doubts everywhere, and there were suspicions everywhere. She had raised many defenses against the emperor, and what she wanted to know the most was his motives and plans. If the father and daughter's unity these years have been lies and deceit, then her ambitious, talented, and bold father must have done many things behind her back, and he must have other plans. She wanted to understand all of this very much. "We will go to the Ministry of Imperial Finances now," she said. "Gather people and make the first move." Father, let me see what you want to do." The one who encroached on the Ministry of Imperial Finances was her, Empress Tensei. The one who entered the palace was him, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince. "Even if you want to scold traitors, you should scold those too. What does it have to do with me?" Sun Lang. Sun Lang picked at his nose and looked at the eunuch in front of him. He said neither yin nor yang. "The Empress Dowager has become muddle-headed from reading too much scripture. The one who tried to poach your imperialism was clearly someone from your oldly family." After the morning court, Empress, who had heard politics for the first time, had excitedly come and angrily left. After all, the Shinsei general was very brave and threw a dozen nails at the mother of the nation. She, who had suffered a great loss, ran back to the palace and wantonly beat and cursed for a while. Then she ran to the Empress Dowager to complain. When the Empress Dowager heard Empress' tearful complaints, she was very surprised. It seemed that in her mind, Sun Lang was a good child who understood the big picture. Why did he become so ruthless in Empress's mouth? Before she could figure out what was going on, explosive news came one after another. First, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince met with the leaders and consecrators of the palace guards and gave clear instructions on how to build a new era of the Imperial Guards. He repeatedly reiterated the mission of the Imperial Guards and criticized the mistakes they made in the case of the Emperor's assassination. In addition, he started the accountability process in his capacity as regent. He wanted everyone to atone for their mistakes and serve as a warning to others. Then he sent out his retainers to supervise and guide the work. After that, Empress Tensei came to the Ministry of Imperial Finances. After the emperor's assassination, she was recommended by the court officials to be responsible for the important task of apprehending the assassins. Now, she had traced all the way to the Ministry of Imperial Finances and ordered all the officials of the Ministry of Imperial Finances to be investigated. During this time, the Ministry of Imperial Finances was handed over to Tensei Province to take over until the officials proved their innocence. Only then could they return to their posts and take back their power. It was a big show. The Empress Dowager was very shocked. On one hand, she sent people to stop the Crown Prince and Empress Concubine. On the other hand, she sent people to reprimand Sun Lang, who knew that Sun Lang acted as if it had nothing to do with him and pushed all of his responsibilities away. Just as the eunuch was about to speak, Sun Lang dug out a piece of booger and casually flicked it. The secretion from the hair follicle of his nostrils whizzed out at a very high speed, brushing past the eunuch's hat and rushing into the distance, setting off a mournful scream. "Shut up. Did I say you could speak?" He then earnestly advised, "The emperor has raised such a child. He has to reflect on his failure as a parent. He has to reflect on whether he was too busy with state affairs and neglected the education of his children. Or perhaps his son has done too many bad things and set a bad example for his children. This old man repaid kindness with enmity and abandoned the bough after the birds are gone. Don't blame his son for not doing anything. From this point of view, the Empress Dowager can't escape the blame. She didn't teach her son well, which led to this result." After General Shunsei finished speaking, he said gently, "Do you understand?" The eunuch trembled and said, "I understand." "Then how do you want to report it?" The eunuch swallowed and replied, "General Shunsei said that this is the emperor's family matter. As a foreign official, it is inconvenient for him to comment. Besides, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince and Empress are loyal to their duties and didn't do anything wrong." Sun Lang nodded and said, "Good. You can go." The eunuch left in a hurry. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince came out from the corner behind Sun Lang. Sun Lang didn't turn his head and said, "Have you sent people to keep an eye on them?" The Crown Prince said in a low voice, "Yes. After Empress goes back, she will definitely not be able to hold back. Or rather, the emperor won't be able to hold back. General Shin's voice became gloomy. According to the script, there is a high probability that a wild person with special powers will appear and then heal the emperor's injury. This is our next enemy. Chapter 1077. This is our next enemy, Sun Lang said calmly. But Li Jiansheng could feel the solemnity and awe in General Shin's words. So His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince also became nervous. Back then, he had heard of the fame of the general and his abilities. After working with him for a few days, he knew that there was no falsehood behind his great reputation. This guy was even more awesome and capable of fighting than the rumors. He had all kinds of wonderful operations at his fingertips and was even better at taking advantage of the situation. He easily stabilized his position as the Crown Prince and made the future situation very good. Although he didn't say it, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was also evolving in the direction that Sun Lang boasted. In his mind, Sun Lang was clearly a master tactician, a genius in politics. He laughed proudly in the imperial court and looked down on the civil and military officials as if they were nothing. His power overturned the imperial court, and the unpredictable battles in the imperial court were like children playing house in front of him. There was no problem in the world that could stop him, and there was no person that he could not defeat. But now, he revealed an extremely serious expression. The enemy he spoke of. Who was it? Could it be that father still had something to rely on? Jiansheng said softly. Could it be? Whoa! Sun Lang glanced at him. That's too scary. The Crown Prince did not understand, and thought that his teacher was afraid of the legend that had influenced the empire for decades. He immediately flattered him. Wu Ho is old, and teacher is at the peak of his life. He is already an important official, and has made great contributions in sieging cities. Who is strong and who is weak, it is clear at a glance. Sun Lang smiled. You did not understand. That is not what I meant. If the person who came was really Bao Heizi's teacher, then it was not a big deal, and it might even be a good thing. He was afraid that the person who came was just a shell of Wu Ho, and the fun would be big, but the probability was not high. Wu Ho was not a stubborn donkey like Bai Yue. How could he be so easily tricked? Moreover, there wasn't enough time. He narrowed his eyes. Don't let your imagination run wild. When the time comes, there will be results. You just need to keep an eye on the imperial city's gates and closely monitor the people coming and going. Even if a fly flies in, don't let it go. The Crown Prince nodded and said, Teacher, don't worry. Mr. Pei and Mr. Wang will personally lead the troops. With the two of them in charge, I am most at ease. I will definitely not give the enemy any opportunity to take advantage of. Speaking up to this point, he hesitated for a moment before asking. It's just that, teacher, the student is slow. If all of this was arranged by Royal Father, then he definitely had a plan long ago. Even if we control the gates of the imperial city, there doesn't seem to be much meaning, because they simply don't need to find a strange person who can cure the Star of Time Sword Scar. They only need to find a random person to perform, and Royal Father will be able to recover. Sun Lang shook his head and said, No, the probability is not high. Today, Empress made a stupid mistake in court, and I took advantage of the situation to checkmate her. I have already poured dirty water on the Emperor, hinting that he was fabricating lies and putting on an act. If his injury healed so quickly and inexplicably, it would be a confession without being pressed, confirming my guess and accusation. He doesn't want to put himself in such a passive situation. His injury has been seen by all the important officials in court. Once he mysteriously recovers, many suspicious points will be revealed. Because the situation is very different now, if he immediately recovers, the officials will suspect that all of this is a farce. Then the big shots in the court will suspect that Ling Muley is really dead or not. They will wonder why Ling Muley came back from the dead and why the Emperor made the wood sword saint fake his death and hide his name for so many years. And all of this will be used by me as the next round of arrows to shoot at him. Sun Lang raised his body and said slowly, he pretended to be injured and unconscious in order to hide behind the scenes and avoid my sharp edge. Then, He calmly planned and controlled the situation. But he didn't expect that I would still disrupt his plan. Now that he is forced to wake up, he has already lost the game. Of course, he has to try his best to stop the loss. So, he has to put on a good show. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince was dizzy and could only reluctantly remember these words. After that, he asked Pei and Prince Wang to analyze it for him. But he still understood one thing. Now that we are guarding the palace gate of the Imperial City, we are blocking the enemy that you mentioned. If he comes, what should we do? Sun Lang smiled faintly. That depends on who the enemy is. He stood up and looked at the sky outside the door. Then he said slowly, but I've already guessed it. The sky was clear as usual. The wind in the Imperial City was slightly chilly, and the autumn air was refreshing. After the swordsman, Zheng Yingzhao finished practicing a series of swordsmanship. He put the long sword in his hand back to the sword rack. He adjusted his breathing, calmed his qi, and focused his mind, and cleansed his sword heart. But after a few breaths, his mind was still full of complicated thoughts. He opened his eyes and sighed helplessly. There were 7 sword palaces in the Imperial City, which corresponded to the 7 luminary sword saint. Every sword palace was guarded by a swordsman. Logically speaking, the 7 luminary sword saint did not have a strict hierarchy. But Zheng Yingzhao's position was above the other swordsmen. It was not because of his outstanding martial arts, nor was it because of his noble status. It was because the name of the sword palace behind him was equivalent to the name of the empire. The name of the sword was Hutu, and it was used to guard the fate of the nation. This sword palace was a hall where the Earth Luminary's sacred sword was enshrined. And the master of this sword palace had unsheathed his sword in the final battle of the Great Desolate Mountain 2 years ago. His brilliance illuminated the heavens, and in the end, he had turned the tide and destroyed the Sky Demon's desperate and frenzied counterattack. He had declared the end of the Great War of Tianyuan. This was an honor that could be recorded in the annals of history. It gave the sword saint of the empire innumerable glory and respect. Even the swordsmen and swordsmen of the Hutu sword palace had ascended to heaven. The glow of glory also covered them. But it was only glory, and it was only glory. No matter how much the subjects and warriors of the world admired the sword saint of the empire, as a swordsman guarding the palace, Zheng Yingzhao knew some inside information that outsiders did not know. In the past 2 years, he had seen the sword saint of the empire no more than 10 times. He had spoken no more than 5 sentences. He had practiced the secret techniques of the Hutu sword palace, but he had noticed that the divine light of the holy sword was not stable. It was even a little weak. The sword saint who had turned the tide wore heavy armor all day long and did not show his true face. Even his voice was distorted by internal force, so people could not hear his true intonation. Of course, if that was all, it was not a big secret. But Zheng Yingzhao had been a swordsman for 20 years. Before the Battle of the Great Desolate Mountain, he had not even seen the Hutu sword for more than 10 years. How ironic. The swordsman guarding the empty sword palace had almost forgotten what the holy sword looked like. He did not know where the holy sword was taken to or who was using the holy sword. It was like an ornament. Until 2 years ago, when the Battle of the Great Desolate Mountain broke out. Relying on the star suppression secret technique passed down in the Hutu sword palace, he sensed the spiritual energy fluctuation of the Hutu holy sword. At that time, he was almost driven mad by the powerful spiritual energy remaining in the spiritual energy fluctuation. The violent vibration and the terrifying impact were like a storm that swept across the world. So at that time, he had learned a secret. The imperial court had announced to the world that in the Battle of the Great Desolate Mountain, the soldiers had been bathed in blood and suffered heavy casualties. At the critical moment that decided the fate of the world, the sword saint of the empire had sensed something. He had used his sword to dazzle the world. He had rushed thousands of li to the Great Desolate Mountain and had turned the situation around before it was irreversible. But Zheng Yingzhao knew that the truth was not like that, because he had sensed the divine light of the holy sword. He knew that the Hutu sword had been in the Great Desolate Mountain from the beginning. At the beginning of the battle, it had suffered heavy injuries. There was no way it could have turned the tide. As for how they had won the battle of the great desolate mountain, he did not dare to think about it. Although he was a sword attendant with a respected status and was even treated with respect by the imperial family, he was not an idiot who practiced martial arts and did not understand the world. He knew that in front of some secrets, the identity of a sword attendant could not protect him at all. He could only bury this secret in his heart and not let anyone know. He did not dare to let the emperor find out. He was just an ordinary person. He felt that he could keep this secret until he brought it into the coffin. History had always been like this. It was allowed to be smeared by the strong. The so-called historians' iron bones were a joke. Even if you were a historian who was not afraid of death and was strong, the people in power would not let you know the truth. Everything you saw and heard was a carefully woven lie. You could not even distinguish between the truth and the lies. So how could you record the truth? He had thought that the truth would remain silent forever. But he was wrong. Because the survivors of the great desolate mountain had returned to the imperial court and turned the imperial capital upside down. Shinsei General Sun Lang, the former commander of war, Jia Ying. His appearance made Zheng Yingzhao recall the past and speculate that he did not dare to think about in detail. More importantly, Sun Lang's spearhead had vaguely pointed at the Hutu Sword Palace and the nation-protecting Sword Sage. He had heard about the shocking change in the Jupiter Sword Palace a few days ago. He had heard that the Wood Sword Sage had come back from the dead and that the nation-protecting Sword Sage was involved. When Zheng Yingzhao heard about this, his heart was in turmoil. Now that the emperor had been assassinated and rumors were flying everywhere, Sun Lang had covered the sky with one hand and was powerful enough to overturn the imperial court. Zheng Yingzhao felt more and more uneasy. He did not know why he was panicking, but he was sure that some things were destined to happen. They were destined from the very beginning, from the great desolate mountain. The Hutu sword, the Hutu sword. He whispered the name of this glorious holy sword. It was named after the country and carried endless glory and greatness. But if all of this was built on lies, what would happen when the truth was revealed? I hope. Zheng Yingzhao revealed a bitter smile, but just as he began to mumble to himself, his mind suddenly jolted. The star swordsman turned around. There was a buzzing sound, and the sword on the sword rack trembled incessantly. It was as if it was expressing its submission. Then, there was a loud buzzing of the sword like a tide. The many famous swords in the Hutu Sword Palace shook together. The buzzing of the sword was clear and melodious, indicating its submission. This was because a peerless divine sword was gradually awakening and revealing its shocking sharpness. With the Hutu Sword Palace as the center, an invisible wave swept across the entire imperial capital. From the seven luminaries' sacred sword to the soaring dragon, fleeting grace, thousands of imperial army troops were shaken. Thousands of martial artists sensed the abnormal movements of their own imperial army. The Sun and Moon Sword Sage stood up at the same time and looked at each other. The brother and sister's eyes were full of shock. Princess Pingyang, who was cleaning Sun Lang's room at the Copper Sparrow Terrace, trembled and then clutched her chest. She felt a sudden throbbing. In the Shun residence, the teacup in Shun Yaohua's hand suddenly fell to the ground. Empress, who was checking the accounts and searching the files in the imperial treasury, suddenly raised her head. Her eyes revealed an expression of disbelief. Then, she fell into a long silence, and Sun Lang, who was talking with the Crown Prince, suddenly fell silent. The Crown Prince also sensed the trembling of his own imperial army. At first, he was puzzled, and then he looked at Sun Lang. But he was surprised to find that this cheap master of his had revealed an unprecedentedly strange expression. There was hatred, excitement, and coldness. His hands were even trembling slightly. The expression in his eyes constantly changed. Finally, everything calmed down. General Shinsei let out a long sigh and slowly stood up. His hands had already returned to normal, and his eyes had already become indifferent. It's here. It's finally here, he thought to himself. Zheng Yingzhao was shocked. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The person in front of him was wearing heavy armor and did not show his true face, but but he could still recognize his identity. Not because of the heavy armor, but because of intuition, even though the person in front of him seemed to be different from the one he had seen 2 years ago. But Zheng Yingzhao could confirm that this was the sword saint of the nation, because he sensed the spiritual ripples of the Hutu divine sword. It was so harmonious and so powerful. It seemed that the sword saint in front of him and the Hutu divine sword had already become one. They had already reached the highest state of being one with the sword. He bowed and said, "Greetings to the sword saint of the nation." Attracted by the strange phenomenon, the swordsman who had hurried over also bowed. "Greetings to the sword saint of the nation." No one doubted the identity of the sword saint, even though he did not show his true face, because when one stood in front of him and saw him, one would know who he was. The sword saint of the nation spoke. Perhaps because of the long period of seclusion, the voice of the hero who had saved the empire and the world was a bit shaky. He said, "His Majesty was attacked by an assassin and was seriously injured and unconscious. I must enter the palace to treat His Majesty's injuries. Open the center gate and open the way for me." Zheng Yingzhao's heart suddenly jumped. An inexplicable panic swept through his mind again. He did not know what would happen, but he felt that something would happen. Sun Lang's figure suddenly flashed through his mind. The sword servant of the Hutu divine sword felt that many things might happen on this trip, but he could not refuse because there was no way to refuse. The sword saint of the nation had ordered him. As the sword servant of the palace, he had to obey unconditionally. So he answered, yes. Their destination was the imperial city. The so-called sword saint of the nation is coming. Sun Lang glanced at His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince, whose face was pale, and said slowly, "Tell your people to prepare." His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince felt fear and confusion. That was the sword saint of the nation. He knew of his prestige and reputation. But how could it be like this? Why did he have to face such an enemy? He said in a trembling voice, What should we prepare?" Sun Lang turned his head. Sun Ran smiled and said, "What do you think?" Under the horrified gaze of the Crown Prince, 2 holy swords appeared around Sun Lang. Mars and Tai Bai danced together. The sword chi of gold and fire intertwined. Then he saw Chun Xing spreading out like ripples. Finally, it was earth which could transform all things and bear all virtues. The power of the 4 holy swords appeared on the same person. He stammered. The radiance disappeared, and everything returned to normal. Sun Lang strode out and said, "You came at the right time." Chapter 1078. A Sword to Protect the Country. A Legend of Martial Arts. The Sword Saint of Earth. A Legend of Wulin, the pinnacle of heroes. He reversed the disadvantage on his own and ended the protracted war of the Heaven's origin sector. There was no more glorious achievement than that. A hero admired and praised by all the people in the world. His fame had even spread out overseas and was worshipped by the foreigners of the 4 countries. His achievements would certainly be passed down to future generations and even become a legend. The person hidden under the heavy armor sneered. That was human beings. What maintained a country and a civilization were lies and falsehoods. A small group of people controlled and fooled most of their own kind through violence and lies, and they kept plundering wealth to satisfy their own desires. It had been like that since ancient times. Most people lived ignorant and pitiful lives in lies. Living in lies was not the saddest thing. The saddest thing was that, even when they realized the fact that they were living in lies, the weak and pitiful people did not have the power to resist or change. Just like right now, they could never have imagined that the legend of the sword saint of the nation was just a lie made up by people, and what the lie was meant to cover were even more despicable and dark crimes. Even if they knew it, what could they do? They were just a bunch of humble and selfish ants. As long as their lives and stability were not affected, why would they care about other people's sufferings and the injustices in the world? At most, they would yell and condemn them verbally. After a while, they would forget everything and chase the rumors on the street and the beauties in the brothels. The people who were ruled, deceived, and plundered had never been the enemy. There was only one real enemy. It was a marvelous weapon that she had polished herself. She had witnessed the growth of the young man with her own eyes. She had seen him turn from cowardice to bravery, from gloominess to cheerfulness, and from humbleness to greatness. She had been polishing the sword day and night. She had spent much more effort and energy on it than she had on her other children. It was her proudest work. It was also her deadliest enemy. The sword saint of earth moved forward in silence. She was wearing a thick armor that covered her face. Nobody could see her face clearly, but her identity was well known. When the generals returned to the capital after the War of the Heavens Origin sector, they stepped on the splendid sea of flowers in the capital with this armor and stepped onto the platform of glory amidst the cheers and reverence of the people. She was the hero of the country and the world. "Hey, a hero!" Exclamations burst out on the road. Some people saw the sword palace of earth, and some recognized her identity. Then the exclamations echoed like stones that were thrown into an empty valley. The sword saint of the nation. The four words were magic. The pedestrians stopped, the peddlers put down their business, and even the high officials and nobles stopped their carriages. Everyone looked over with excitement. Because humans were social creatures, when they were in a group, their ability to distinguish, reason, and willpower would drop rapidly, and they would become extremely emotional. They would be easily swayed by others. So, the cheers grew louder and louder. Some were shouting their greetings, some were crying, and more people followed the sword palace. Led by the sword servants of the Hotu earth, many sword sons strode forward with their swords and followed behind the sword saint. The solemn scene made people realize that something big was about to happen. Yes, something big. The sword saint of earth's face was still expressionless under the helmet. Her disciple, the peerless weapon she made, and the greatest enemy she made for herself. She learned a lot from her disciple. That day in the great desolate mountains, their souls clashed, slaughtering each other without regard for anything else. In the spiritual world, an incomparably dangerous, instantaneous, and eternal confrontation unfolded. The two foreign departed souls saw many things from each other's souls. She learned a lot from Sun Lang. The sword saint of earth turned her head slightly and looked at someone in the crowd. It was a noble woman in silk. She was waving her handkerchief and screaming at the top of her lungs. Sensing the sword saint's gaze, the woman showed ecstasy and happiness, as if she was favored by the gods. The sword saint of earth nodded slightly. The woman became crazier and crazier. She lifted her luxurious dress and followed more and more followers, ignoring the maids and servants who tried to stop her. The people had great power. This was the principle that water could carry a boat, but it could also capsize it. But in most cases, water could not capsize a boat, unless there were external forces such as strong winds or undercurrents. Just like in most cases, the power of the people was scattered sand and could not be gathered together. Even if they were gathered together, they would be used by the conspirators. Yes, the people were blind. They needed to be guided, and they could be used, just like now. This was what Sun Lang had taught him. He had indeed learned a lot, and he could put what he had learned to use. The identity of the sword saint of the nation was a double-edged sword. If he used it well, it meant a great reputation and appeal, enough to gather the general trend. It was enough to help him destroy everything. The sword saint of the nation moved forward in silence. His goal was the gate of heaven influence. He did not sneak in, but arrived openly. Listening to the cheers and watching the surging crowd, the sword saint of the nation had a very strange thought. He felt that all this was very funny. The people followed a fake hero and believed in him without a doubt. They were being used blindly and passionately moving forward. And the person they were pointing at was the real hero who had stopped the catastrophe of the divine land and sunk the world. And this hero was a pitiful person from another world. He was just a weak and pitiful person who lived in a carefree world. In the blink of an eye, he was thrown into the abyss of blood and fire. He endured pain that he should not have endured and fought for a world that had nothing to do with him. Even when he fell into despair and madness in the great desolate mountain, he still completed the magnificent feat of defeating the sky demon. This country, this world, was saved by such a person. But no one knew, and no one would thank him. All of this was so funny that it made him laugh. But at the end of the day, this fake and boring world was just like this. There was no hope at all. It should have been destroyed a long, long time ago. Now, this world had a sacred mission, which was to be a stage and a battlefield to continue the Battle of Tianyuan that had not yet ended. The two parties in the battle were two souls that did not belong to this world. Sunlang, I have waited for hundreds of years for you. I have waited for this day for a very, very long time. I have taught you, trained you, and made you who you are. And you have taught me, and you will make me who I am. Let's begin. This was just the beginning. The light of the Imperial Army bloomed. Amidst the surprised and shocked cries of the crowd, the sword of Hutu materialized and was firmly held in the hands of the sword saint of the nation. The legendary hero raised his sword to the sky. The vigorous sword aura pierced through the sky, shocking the entire capital and attracting more and more attention. The sword saint of Hutu came with great momentum. Outside the gate of heaven influence, the crowd also saw the brilliance of the sword aura. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince looked awful. Even the officials in the Crown Prince's residence were shaken, not to mention the guards of the Imperial Palace, whose loyalty was unquestionable. After all, the reputation of the sword saint of the nation was too great. No matter when, no matter where, no matter what the goal was, it was a very crazy idea to clash swords with this legendary hero. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince secretly glanced at Sunlang. If it were not for the fact that Sunlang released the spiritual energy of four elements at the same time, Li Jiansheng might have been scared. At this moment, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince was still in a daze. He knew that the spiritual energy of the four elements could not be faked. But here came a question. Putting aside the fire element and the gold element, what about the water element and the earth element? However, such a scene did give him some confidence and hope. He whispered Teacher, should we send people to stop them? Scouts had already reported back that the Hutu Sword Palace's army had arrived in droves. This was a question that did not need to be answered. Stop them? If the crowd revolted and there were casualties, his reputation as the Crown Prince would be ruined. Pei Zhu and the others had already made their preparations. The moment Sunlang said the word stop, they were prepared to risk their lives to persuade him. No matter what, they couldn't let Sunlang bring her highness into the pit. But if they did not stop them, what should they do? The reason the Crown Prince had been able to call the wind and summon the rain in court these days was all because the Emperor was unconscious and unable to attend court. In the future, the Earth Sword Saint would personally come. Once he entered the palace and cured the Emperor, then the present good situation would immediately be declared over. It might even lead to the Emperor's counterattack. But if they were to stop him, how would they be able to stop such a big shot? Everyone looked at Sunlang. At this point, they could only rely on the miraculous Sunlang. Hopefully, he could still turn the tide this time. Sunlang came back from the long silence. As if talking to himself, he muttered, "Not bad." His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince was stunned. What? I said not bad. He actually learned how to mobilize the crowd. What a shameless thing. General Shunsei said indifferently. But as I expected, he really came with F2A. But it doesn't matter. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. I've never been afraid of anyone in a head-on battle. He looked up at the sky. Blazing sharpness emerged from his body. The sword aura of the Chaos Sword turned into surging flames that burned the sky. It resonated with the sword aura of the Earth Star. The Sword Palace of Hutu was approaching the gate of heaven influence. The leader was the Sword Saint in heavy armor. Behind him were the Sword Sons of the palace, and then the common people. And there was only one person and one sword in front of this flood. Stop! The voice was calm but distant. It reached everyone's ears. The troops still moved forward in silence. Stop! The voice was several times louder. It was like a thunderclap, containing an inviolable awe. The Sword Sons hesitated. The common people all slowed down, but the person at the front of the troop still moved forward at a steady pace. This gave everyone the courage to continue following. Stop! The sword aura was like a phoenix flying across the sky. The burning sword aura turned into a torrent of flowing flames. In an instant, it traveled thousands of feet. It swept past 3 feet above the heads of the crowd and roared in the sky. The violent power that could destroy everything enveloped everyone's heart, making them feel the most direct sense of fear and threat. The gate of heaven influence is in front of us. Before the emperor, only the ministers can enter. Unless summoned, no one can enter. You're just common people. What are you up to? Aren't you afraid of death? The roar that contained supreme power was deafening. Together with the deterrence of the sword aura, it extinguished a large amount of impulsive flames. Violence and intimidation had always been the best weapon to deal with common people. A hot-blooded sword son who worshipped the sword saint of the country shouted, "The sword saint of the star is here." Sun Lang raised the holy sword. The sword aura was everywhere. He said indifferently, "The sword saint of Mars is here. As a sword son, you should know the rules of the sword palace. Do you have the right to speak in front of the sword saint?" That sword son was probably still hot-blooded. Just as he was about to talk back, sword attendant Zheng Yingzhao, who was leading the sword sons, immediately shifted her position and pressed down on this idiot's mute acupoint, strangling his death-seeking words in his throat. Sun Lang squinted his eyes and sneered in his heart. Damn, what a pity. Huta had established herself as a martial artist. The strong were respected, and the rules were strict. Especially in the sword palace, the hierarchy was inviolable. A mere sword son dared to intervene in the confrontation between 2 luminary sword saints, and even if he was killed by a single sword strike, no one would be able to find any fault with it. If he killed this idiot now, he could force the Earth Hutu sword saint to make a move. Once they made a move, he would have won half the battle. If the Earth Hutu sword saint held back, he would have another move. Come on, let's do it. Sun Lang's eyes flashed with a mocking light. He had never been afraid of anyone in a head-on fight, even if it was the sword saint. But the Earth Hutu sword saint still did not say a word. He walked forward in silence, as if everything that had just happened was not enough to make him stop. Stop, Sun Lang said calmly. This is the Imperial Palace. Idlers are not allowed to enter. Reveal your identity and state your purpose for coming. The Earth Hutu sword saint did not seem to hear him and kept moving forward. What? Playing silence? Not saying a word? Worried that you can't beat me in a game of words? Worried that I'll catch you? You think too much. It's better if you don't say anything. The late emperor personally appointed the Sword Saint of Mars. He was a meritorious warrior of Tianyuan and was conferred the title of General of Shinsei. His Majesty entrusted him to the Crown Prince. I'm Sun Lang, and I'm warning you. Stop and show your identity. The crowd behind the Sword Saint looked indignant. The Sword Saint of the nation was everyone's hero. This is the Sword Saint of the nation. Don't you know him? Someone shouted in the crowd. Sun Lang said coldly, I don't know him because I can't see his face. If you can believe his identity with just a holy sword, then I can tell you that Empress personally confirmed that the person who assassinated His Majesty was the legendary with Saint Spirit, Mu Li. If your Sword Saint of the nation intends to assassinate His Majesty, then after His Majesty passes away, the families of those who come with him and testify for him will be executed. He raised his voice and asked, Now, who wants to testify for him? The Wood Saint of the nation assassinated His Majesty. The explosive news caused an uproar and panic. For a moment, the civilians who were not well informed were shocked and panicked. They were the rulers who had been deceived and lived in a lie. A little bit of real news was enough to set off a storm. The question of who wants to testify for him was selectively ignored. If you don't stop, I'll treat you as a traitor with bad intentions. The civilians will testify for you. Sun Lang pointed his sword forward and said, This is the only warning. Don't say that I didn't warn you. The Earth Hutu sword saint finally stopped. I'm the owner of the star-suppressing sword. His voice was a little hoarse. I'm here to treat His Majesty's injury." Then Sun Lang said calmly, "Take off your mask and let me see your true face." Chapter 1079. Let me see who you really are. Sun Lang strode toward the Sword Saint of Earth. The General of Divine Strategy's expression was very calm. The Fire Saint's sword was pointed at the ground, and the distance between his feet was not too far nor too close. "Put your hands where I can see them. Don't move. Keep quiet. Don't do anything that will arouse suspicion. First of all, I need to confirm your real identity." Sun Lang closed in with large strides. The intimidating pressure seemed to have condensed into a dark cloud that connected the heavens and the earth, ferociously rushing forward. A single person actually had the effect of an army of thousands of men and horses. His swift and fierce aura made people hold their breaths. "After all, you're the Sword Saint of Earth." A mocking smile appeared on his lips. "We seem to have a personal grudge." Before the other party replied, he continued, "A few days ago, you appeared in the Chronos Sword Palace and pretended to be me to attack Mu Li, the Sword Saint of Wood. It was obviously a false accusation. I found traces of Earth spiritual energy at the scene. If I may ask, what was your purpose for doing that? After that, Ling Mu Li attacked the Emperor. Was it related to your actions that day?" The Sword Saint of Earth said coldly, "Get out of my way. Now is not the time to talk about that. I need to save His Majesty." Sun Lang said calmly, "Now is the time. If you cannot give a reasonable explanation for your behavior, you will never be clear to suspicion. Who knows whether you were there to save His Majesty or to kill the Emperor?" "Shut up." The Sword Saint of Earth's voice suddenly turned cold. "Are you insulting my honor and dignity? Are you provoking the hero who ended the war of heaven's origin? You are the one who should shut up." Sun Lang's voice was equally cold. "It was not you who ended the war of heaven's origin. It was all the people who sacrificed themselves on the heaven's origin battlefield and on the Grand Desolate Mountain. They established the cornerstone of victory with their blood and lives. They were the greatest contributors to the victory of the war, not you who appeared at the last moment and watched them die. The real Sword Saint of Earth should know that. That's why she never boasted about her contributions and achievements. She did not accept any rewards, and she refused any form of honor and support because she knew that the endless glory did not belong to her. She would never call herself a hero and talk nonsense here." He said sternly, "That's why I suspect that you're not the Sword Saint of the nation. Just like how the real Wood Sword Saint would never assassinate the king, Ling Mu Li had died in the Great Desolate Mountain a long time ago. The one who wields the Sword of Jupiter and wears Ling Mu Li's face is just an imposter. Since even the Wood Elemental Sword Saint might have turned into a different person, I have reason to believe that the National Sword Saint who reversed the situation of the Great Desolate Mountain might not be pure anymore." Sun Lang slowed down, but the pressure in everyone's hearts grew heavier. Everyone could see that this Shansei general was ready for battle, and he didn't even try to hide it. "Do you think that by using the reputation and glory that does not belong to you, you can deceive the people who do not know the truth and force them to come here? You can use the general trend to move, break through our obstruction, and go to the side of the king? In your dreams." His shouts were like heavy hammers pounding on everyone's hearts. The people who followed the National Sword Saint of the nation were shaken, confused, and even flinched. Getting to the bottom of it, the Sword Saint of the Earth had only learned the basics from Sun Lang and did not understand the essence of mass warfare. Or rather, he did not have the time to do that. Those fanatical and blind followers only joined the team spontaneously based on their admiration and passion for the Sword Saint of the Earth in their hearts. There was no mobilization in advance, no passionate speech, no organization, no unified ideology, and no clear goal. Such people were easy to gather and even easier to disperse. It was especially so right now when the Seven Luminaries Sword Saint, another great minister of the court, stood out and blocked the team's advance in an unyielding manner. He also listed the many suspicions on the Sword Saint of the Earth with such certainty that he did not seem to be lying. The longer it was delayed, the faster the people's enthusiasm cooled. Sun Lang was no more than 10 meters away from the sword saint of the earth. He saw the enemy's eyes through the thick helmet, whose body was hiding under the armor. That was actually not important. What was important was that he had already made his move. The naive guy wanted to play the vast ocean of the people, but he had forgotten the principle that water could carry a boat, but it could also sink a boat. Today, I will teach him another lesson. Since you have already set up the stage, let's put on a good show together. Let me expose your true face in public and the unspeakable conspiracy between you and the Emperor. Let me plant the seed of suspicion in everyone's heart. General Shunsei said slowly, I'll say it one last time. Take off your mask and give a reasonable explanation for your previous behavior. Otherwise, not only will you not be able to step into the royal palace, you will also be arrested by me. You can still resist. Or rather, I'm looking forward to your resistance. Sun Lang continued forward. He raised his hand and grabbed the helmet of the national sword saint of the nation. He had already prepared 2 gifts for his old friend. Regardless of whether the other party chose to surrender or resist, regardless of whether he chose to fight or fight, Sun Lang had already prepared a countermeasure. He wanted to shatter that hypocritical and laughable mask outside the gate of heaven influence. After all, he had never been afraid of anyone in a head-on fight. So no, such a refusal came from under the armor of the national sword saint of the nation. Sun Lang was slightly startled. Then he said coldly, in other words, you can't prove your identity? The sword saint of the earth shook his head and said, no, I can, but there is no time. Then his figure suddenly burst out and rushed forward. Sun Lang's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately brandished his sword and stabbed forward. Mars summoned blazing heavenly fire. The flaming blade changed and attacked like a phoenix with its wings down. It was a simple sword attack, but it was able to fully display the Mars sword while on the fire Yin. Even the fire sword saint from 2 generations ago, Qi Lianyan, could not compare to it. Theoretically, no one in the world could easily block this strike. But this time, the enemy was different. It was the creator of the fire sword saint. It was the father of the Mars sword, the ancestor of the imperial army, and the source of Hutu's power. As soon as the sword was launched, the fire spiritual energy of the Mars sword suddenly weakened. Sun Lang was shocked. He immediately retracted his attack and defended himself, waiting for the enemy's earth-shattering strike. However, the sword saint of the earth did not take the opportunity to counterattack. Instead, he agilely swept past Mars' sword and continued to rush toward the gate of heaven influence. Sun Lang was not shocked. Instead, he was overjoyed. He shouted, close the gate. Guard the gate. Someone is breaking into the palace. After that, he chased after the sword saint of the earth. Humph, you want to bypass me and go straight to the central palace to cure the emperor? That's a good idea. As long as I can save the pretentious emperor, all the problems will be solved. It's a good idea, but how can I let you do as you wish? He shouted. The royal palace is under martial law. There is a traitor pretending to be the national sword saint and breaking into the palace. Don't let him get close to His Majesty's palace. This is another assassination that has been planned for a long time. The crown prince and the others were guarding outside the gate of heaven influence. When they saw the sword saint of the earth charging over unstoppably, they were shocked. The national sword saint's reputation and honor were too dazzling. Who would believe that he wanted to enter the palace to assassinate the emperor? Who would dare to lightly and cleverly stand in front of him? There were a few valiant generals under Jiansheng. They wanted to show off in front of their master, so they immediately urged their horses and shouted to welcome him. However, the sword saint of the earth did not fight with them at all. He just dodged and went around them, rushing toward the gate. The difference in martial arts between the two sides was too great. Even if he kept dodging, the generals would not be able to catch up. When the guards at the gate saw this, they let out a shout, but it was just for show. When the sword saint rushed over, they dispersed. It was unknown whether they had received orders beforehand or were unreliable. The sword saint of the earth rushed into the palace and went straight in. Sun Lang chased after him. When he passed by His Highness the Crown Prince, he paused for a moment and whispered, "Hurry up and call people to come into the palace to surround and watch the show. I want to make your father unable to step down from the stage." Then he accelerated again and rushed into the palace. The two of them, one in front and one behind, almost turned into flowing light as they started an intense chase. The palace was already in chaos. The brilliance of the imperial army rose and fell one after another. The guards in the palace immediately reacted, and the consecrators also moved when they heard the news. However, the royal palace was not an outside court. This was the absolute territory of the royal family. The crown prince had yet to control this place. Even though the emperor was unconscious, the wills of Empress and the Empress Dowager were still very effective. Therefore, when the sword saint of the nation rushed into the imperial palace, he was almost unimpeded. No one came out to stop him. On the contrary, Sun Lang was unintentionally stopped several times. It was either because the great defense formation was suddenly activated, or because some consecrator was momentarily dazzled. Although he only managed to buy a few breaths of time, it was already enough. In front of him was the emperor's bedroom. In the end, Sun Lang was too slow. Not to mention the numerous obstructions from the imperial palace. His opponent this time was also the most terrifying individual on the planet. Moreover, he was unprepared, so it was normal that he couldn't stop him for a while. He stopped and watched the sword saint of the earth enter the emperor's bedroom, because two women were blocking his way. Empress and the Empress Dowager, the two most powerful women in the palace, took out their respective empress treasures, the Wan Phoenix heavenly stamp and the Pan Huang seal. These two treasures were tokens of status in the imperial army. They were also in the hands of women in the harem. Their attack power was nothing to write home about, but their defense power was ridiculously high. They could be beaten to death, but it would be too ugly if they were beaten to death. But if they weren't beaten to death, it would be more difficult, because Sun Lang wasn't ready to flood the palace. He stopped and asked, "What do you want, your majesties?" Empress Dowager sneered proudly. "Sun Lang, give up. I sent someone to invite the national sword saint to treat his majesty's injury. You obstructed the sword saint of the earth with the intention of delaying his majesty's injury to satisfy your own desire for power. His majesty will explain such a sin to you when he wakes up." The Empress Dowager looked at Sun Lang and shook her head slowly. "General Shansei, you let me down." Sun Lang put away the holy sword and said lightly, "Your majesties let me down. You can't tell right from wrong. You're asking a tiger for its skin. It won't be long before you reap what you sow. I hope you won't regret it then." Empress Dowager sneered, "Shameless boasting." Sun Lang said slowly, "There are many suspicious and doubtful points about the so-called sword sage of the nation. Today, he broke into the imperial palace violently. His crime is not small, and he seems to have a guilty conscience. In the past, he contacted Ling Yuli and framed me for no reason. All these things have to be explained one by one. Just now, the imperial palace was in turmoil. The ministers will be here soon. Even if this sword sage can really cure his majesty, he has to go through me." Empress Dowager stared at Sun Lang and asked sharply, "Even so?" In other words, General Shansei also thinks that the national sword saint is here to treat his majesty's injury? Didn't you say that the other party was suspected and was a rebel? Why did you change your mind now? In my opinion, you did everything you could to stop the sword sage of the nation from entering the palace. You don't want his majesty to recover from his injuries. Such a crime should be discussed." Sun Lang laughed. "Don't pretend, Empress Dowager," he said. "His majesty's injury is a farce that he directed and acted out himself. In fact, he doesn't need the so-called sword saint of the nation to treat him. As long as his majesty wants to recover, any Tom, Dick, or Harry can help him recover quickly. The reason why he wants the sword saint of Hoodoo to do this wonderful thing is that he wants to use the power and reputation of the sword saint of the nation to fight against me. Don't waste your breath on this little trick." Empress Dowager said sternly, "Nonsense! How dare you speculate about the emperor?" Sun Lang was about to retort when his expression suddenly changed. A look of shock appeared on his face, as if he had discovered something that caught him off guard. Then, the two empresses also turned their heads, because there was a violent energy fluctuation coming from the direction of the emperor's bedroom. It was as if a small sun had risen in the room. The power of elemental energy turned into endless light and heat, which instantly spread out and shone on people's bodies, making them feel warm. After a while, the light and heat disappeared, and the bedroom regained its peace. Then there was the sound of crying. The two empresses' dowager's expression changed greatly. Ignoring Sun Lang, they immediately rushed to the bedroom. Sun Lang stayed where he was, his expression wooden. He watched as the two women pushed open the door of the bedroom. The crying inside suddenly became much louder. The eunuchs, palace maids, consecrators, and even the imperial physicians were crying on the ground. However, the emperor was sitting on the dragon bed perfectly fine. Tears streamed down his face as he hammered the bed. The heavy armor of the Hutu sword saint, on the other hand, was scattered on the ground. The dazzling Hutu sword, on the other hand, was floating in the air, emitting unparalleled brilliance as it accepted the kowtows and cries of everybody. Empress Dowager asked anxiously, "It's me. It's me who implicated him." The emperor's sorrowful voice intermittently said, "He was severely injured in the great desolate mountain. After 2 years of seclusion, he did not get better. Now that I was assassinated and unconscious for the country and the world, he forcefully activated the earth elemental energy and sacrificed himself to heal my injuries. I really, so that's how it is. So that's how it is." Sun Lang was expressionless. He listened, pondered, and then nodded. Cool, 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 cool. Chapter 1080. Death. Death meant the end of life. Everyone had to die. Therefore, death had a very special meaning in human civilization. Death meant that a person left the world forever. It meant that the people who were still alive could no longer see his voice and smile. The life, meaning, evaluation, and survival of the dead would be fixed, leaving a solidified impression, like a black and white photo. And the image of the dead would quickly and rigidly solidify. People would evaluate this person with a more tolerant attitude. This was the so-called thinking of the dead as the most important. If this person was not a pure bad person, then this kind of thinking of the dead as the greatest would be more incisively and vividly reflected. When evaluating this dead person, people's attitude would be more cautious, gentle, and even reverent. Any negative evaluation would be too harsh and harsh. If you had old grievances with this dead person who was not a bad person, then you should forgive and let go. Otherwise, you would appear narrow-minded. After all, the person was dead, right? If the deceased was still a hero in the usual sense, then this situation would become even more serious. As the saying goes, the coffin is closed, and anyone who tries to restore the truth will be regarded as treacherous. The deceased hero cannot tolerate any blemish or blame, and even the slightest dissent will be regarded as sensationalism and treason. Logically speaking, this kind of public opinion environment to protect the reputation of the hero was a good thing. It could defend the honor and reputation of those brave and fearless victims to the greatest extent, attack some boring and even hateful busybodies, and purify the atmosphere of the whole society. But there were two sides to everything. What if this hero was really not a hero? This was the dilemma Sun Lang was facing now. He figured out all the causes and consequences of the matter about a minute after the incident. It turned out that the Hutu sword saint, or the devil Yuan, had never intended to confront him head-on from the beginning. Whether it was the vast ocean of people's war, or the fierce momentum of the sword soaring into the sky, all of it was a cover, an illusion used to mislead Sun Lang. The devil Yuan and the emperor had set this strategy from the beginning. The devil ancestor could control anyone's body and put on the armor of the sword saint of Hutu. He came to the gate of heaven influence under the watchful eyes of the public. After quarreling and even fighting with Sun Lang, he rushed into the palace with an indomitable force and came to the front of the emperor, who was in a coma. Then he would die a heroic death in a solemn and magnificent manner. Yes, a hero. This was the Imperium, a country with royal power. Loyalty and filial piety were the most appreciated qualities. In this country, one of the most appreciated qualities of loyalty was exchanging one's own life for the life of the emperor. Just like the performance of the sword saint of Hutu, he burned himself and healed the emperor's wounds at the cost of his own life. Therefore, the nation-protecting sword sage became a hero again. 2 years ago, he had single-handedly reversed the disadvantageous situation at the Great Desolate Mountain, destroyed the Sky Demon's final counterattack, and won the great victory in the War of Heaven's origin. That great victory made him a living legend, a hero of the entire human race, admired and admired by the world. And now, he had sacrificed himself to save the emperor whose life was hanging by a thread. The dead should be respected. A hero who calmly faced death without fear of the Yellow Springs was even greater. This final act of loyalty and great sacrifice was enough to push the nation-protecting sword sage onto the altar. If this world had things like merit and virtue, then the sword saint of Hutu could almost instantly become a saint and mold a golden body. If this world had things like legendary points, then the sword saint of Hutu would immediately become a green crutch. This kind of hero was naturally sacred and inviolable. People could not doubt him, criticize him, or have any negative evaluation of him. They could only praise him, revere him, and deify him. This meant that some small matters that were detrimental to the reputation of the nation-protecting sword sage would be swept away by the wind. For example, the matters that had occurred not long ago in the Stellar Sword Palace. The nation-protecting sword sage had been accused of having a brief exchange with the assassin Ling Muli and of attempting to impersonate General Sun Lang of the Shinsei. From today onwards, these small matters were no longer important, because the person involved had already passed away in a glorious and magnificent manner. No one would look into these insignificant matters. Those who try to get to the bottom of the matter would be opposed and obstructed by almost everyone, because the dead should be respected. The nation-protecting sword sage was already dead, and he had died a great and glorious death. But for Sun Lang, this was not good news. First of all, the sword saint of Hutu was already dead. Once the imperial court officially closed the coffin, he would lose an excellent weapon against the emperor. The image of the nation-protecting sword sage would be hallowed and completely severed from him, becoming an inviolable and untouchable taboo. And this was probably what the emperor and the devil wanted. Secondly, with this matter, he was in an extremely passive position. Because this was a trap, he had originally thought that the devil would lead the people to the front of the two armies and have a good talk. He had not expected that the devil would not even say any vulgar words and just rush into the imperial palace. The sword saint of Hutu had sacrificed himself in such a sacred and magnificent manner, making Sun Lang's previous obstruction and rebuke seem like a great villain. This could be considered a silent loss. If the emperor did things properly, he could even put the blame on Sun Lang. For example, he could spread rumors like, the sword saint wanted to save his majesty, but was obstructed by General Shinsei. The two sides fought, and the sword saint was already injured. He was worried about his majesty's safety and did not want to waste his energy, so he was injured by General Shen's sword. This would forcefully connect Sun Lang with the death of the sword saint of Hutu. This was more or less a blow to Sun Lang's reputation. In short, the emperor finally got what he wanted. With a reasonable reason, he recovered from his injury and got rid of the nation-protecting sword saint, a time bomb. He had eliminated a great hidden danger in the Battle of the Great Barren Mountain and successfully turned the death of the sword saint of Hutu into his own weapon. He had successfully turned the tables. As for the situation that Sun Lang was facing, he became somewhat passive. He approached silently, listening to the cries of the eunuchs and palace maids, and looking at the emperor's grief-stricken appearance. He felt that he was watching a funny farce. The Empress Dowager and Empress were also caught in shock. They did not seem to be faking it. After all, the sword saint of Hutu was known as the nation-protecting sword saint of Hutu. He had saved all of Hutu 2 years ago. He He was like an eternal legend of the empire. Now that he had died so suddenly and silently, even the Empress Dowager, who was the mother of the empire, was dumbfounded. Murderous intent appeared in Sun Lang's eyes. The simplest and most effective way to break out of the situation was through violence. He would kill everyone present and claim that he was the nation-protecting sword saint of Hutu. He would go on a rampage and not only kill His Majesty, but also slaughter the Empress Dowager, Empress, and all the eunuchs, palace maids, and guards. When Sun Lang arrived, it would be too late. But he could not. First of all, there were so many people. The Emperor, the Empress Dowager, and Empress all had their own treasures. The Imperial Army only needed to stop Sun Lang for a while. When the others arrived, he would become a crazy traitor. Secondly, even if he could kill them all, the officials of the imperial court were not fools. They would definitely have their suspicions. Sun Lang's bloodthirsty, deranged, and monstrous martial prowess would definitely attract the vigilance and conspiracy of various parties. In the end, even if he could kill everyone present and clear himself of suspicion by exquisite means, it would be useless, because Sun Lang's biggest enemy was the ancestor, the devil, who was hiding in the dark. The reason why the emperor was afraid of Sun Lang was not only because he was afraid of the secrets that Sun Lang had mastered, but also because he was afraid of the force that Sun Lang had shown. He did not fall out with Sun Lang because he was afraid that this guy would wander around the world, killing people and setting fires everywhere. After all, with Sun Lang's martial arts, wisdom, and destructive power, it was enough to become the eternal nightmare of the entire empire. What the emperor was afraid of was actually what Sun Lang was afraid of. He was afraid of the devil, the ancestor, because in the whole world, only he could defeat this ancient ghost. Once he killed the emperor with thunderous means and destroyed all the plans of the devil, the ancestor would immediately escape into the dark and become the nightmare that gave Sun Lang the most headache. He was not afraid of the devil's sneak attack, but what about Yin Luo and the others? Therefore, the devil was Sun Lang's biggest enemy. What he was looking for was a layout that would destroy it forever and not give a chance to breathe and escape. Before that, he could not be impulsive. The murderous intent in Sun Lang's eyes disappeared. At this moment, there was a lot of noise. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince rushed over with his subordinates. After Jiansheng heard the crying from the bedchamber, a strong joy flashed in his eyes. Pei Ju, who was beside him, immediately kicked him. His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince showed a look of disbelief. His face became pale, his body trembled, and he could not even stand. He said in a trembling voice, What's wrong?" Sun Lang waved to him. "Come here. Your father's injury is healed." So His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince's body shook again, and he showed an even more disbelieving look. His face became even paler, and his body began to tremble for real. He almost fell to the ground. "Don't worry." Sun Lang's voice was very calm. "I said, I will support you. Go and see your father." How could His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince dare to go? But he had to go. He forced himself to go all the way to Sun Lang. From Shin's point of view, he saw the emperor sitting on the dragon bed and sighing. The last trace of hope in his heart disappeared. He knelt on the ground with a thud and crawled over, crying as he crawled. "Father! Father!" His voice was filled with fear and flattery. Sun Lang looked at Li Jianxing's back, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Pei Ju and the others also followed. Their ranks were not high, so they did not dare to enter. They could only kneel outside and shout like a tsunami. "His Majesty is blessed. His Majesty is in good health." At the same time, the guards and consecrators who rushed over all knelt on one knee. After confirming that the news was true, they offered their sincere blessings and loyalty to their emperor. The cheers shook the inner palace. Since His Majesty was assassinated, all the haze and turmoil dissipated. Once His Majesty's body recovered, the situation immediately stabilized. The important officials who received the news arrived one after another, and the palace servants also spontaneously gathered around Yuji Hall. The people who knelt were endless, forming a black mass. Everyone's face was filled with smiles from the bottom of their hearts. His Majesty was awake. His Majesty was well. Who dared to be unhappy? Only Sun Lang still stood alone in the same place. There was no one within 30 feet of him. When the cheers died down, Empress' voice rang out. Women held grudges, and her voice was filled with pride and resentment. Previously, Sun Lang had greatly offended her. Now that His Majesty was awake, in Empress's simple view of revenge, the time to strike back had finally come. She said, "His Majesty's injuries have healed. Is General Shunsei not happy? The civil and military officials, His Imperial Highness the Crown Prince, and the palace officials are all praying for His Majesty. Why is General Shunsei standing alone and not saying a word?" Sun Lang said indifferently, "I've already seen His Majesty's recovery. I'm happy, but there's no need to be in such a hurry to express it. After all, His Majesty is wise and knows my loyalty very well. The reason why I'm not saying a word is because I remember a good friend, Empress. The sword saint of the nation died for His Majesty. Aren't you sad?" Empress was turned around and was furious. "You're about to die, yet you're still talking nonsense," she said angrily. "Good friend? Previously, outside the gate of heaven influence, it was you who stopped the sword saint, obstructed him in every way possible, spoke ill of him, and even confronted him with weapons. Now you're good friends?" Sun Lang said calmly, "I stopped him at that time because I really didn't know if he was the sword saint of the nation that I knew. Now that I know, he used his own life to prove his loyalty. However, I still have doubts in my heart. I don't know why he chose such a resolute method and didn't care about his own life." Empress laughed coldly. "It sounds like you're very close to the sword saint of the nation." Sun Lang sighed. "Yes, we couldn't be more close. In the great desolate mountains, it was me who fought alongside him. Together, we discovered that the sky demon was trying to rise from the ashes, so we made an agreement. He would protect the empire on the surface, while I faked my death and hid my identity, investigating the truth in the dark. Although we only knew each other for a short time, heroes cherish heroes and have long since become sworn friends. Now that I've returned to the capital, I'm also fulfilling my agreement with him. I'm going to join forces with him to completely exterminate the remnants of the sky demon." At this point, he took a deep breath and tried his best to make his tone as calm as possible. But why did he choose such an ending without a word? He didn't even discuss it with me. This subject is both sad and confused. Why? We clearly had an agreement before, so why did he choose to die so rashly? "I'd be a fool to believe you," Empress said loudly. "Sun Lang, what are you still making up stories for? You've already told the entire city about what happened in the Star Sword Palace. Just now, outside the Sky-Bearing Gate, you were showing off your strength in front of the Sword Saint. All of this shows that the two of you don't know each other. Now that the Sword Saint is dead and there's no one to confront you, you're spouting nonsense. You said you had an agreement with him long ago, that you were sworn friends. Do you have proof?" Sun Lang sighed. "Of course I do. Earth's spiritual energy that could transform all things bloomed brilliantly." Shin's voice was full of sorrow. "He taught me the star suppression secret art. This is proof." Chapter 1081. Empress's eyes narrowed. The officials who had rushed over were speechless as they looked at the radiance of the earth element. This was the only thing that could not be faked. This was clearly the power of the Hutu holy sword. As if drawn by this power, the earth element sword floating in the air let out a crisp sword hum. The sword flew out of the imperial palace and rushed into the sky, blooming with spiritual light. The might of the head of the imperial army spread out, and many of the imperial army in the imperial city buzzed in submission. Then, the earth element sword swooped down towards Sun Lang. Someone shouted, "The earth element sword has chosen its master." The imperial army had spirits, and, as the head of the 7 luminaries, the earth element sword was a peerless imperial army that stood at the peak of the empire. It could even choose its own master. Sun Lang had just displayed the earth element sword. and the earth element sword had revealed its taming intent without hesitation. There was no doubt that he had learned the earth element sword from the Sword Saint. Even if Empress wanted to find fault with him, she could not find fault with him. Her fingernails dug into her flesh, and she revealed a look of resentment. What was going on? What was going on? What was going on? Why did he have the star element sword? Could it really be the earth element sword saint? In any case, there was nothing she could do about what was happening in front of her eyes. Sun Lang, as the great general of heaven origin, had made outstanding contributions and was a first-rank official. He had a great reputation in the imperial court, and his own ability was extremely strong. He was a great threat to the imperial family who challenged the imperial power and disturbed the court. Now, if he took over the Hutu sacred sword and became the new sword saint of the nation, his reputation and power would rise to another level. Even the emperor would find it difficult to control him. Many officials also lowered their eyes, not wanting to watch this scene. Sun Lang already had the sacred sword of fire in his hands, and it was said that Bai Yue had also given him the sacred sword of gold. Including the one in front of him, he already had 3 out of the 7 strongest imperial army. The sacred sword of Hutu also had a very special meaning. With the title of the Sword Saint of the Empire, Sun Lang was already showing signs of monopolizing the imperial army, except for Sun Lang's trusted subordinates. No one wanted to see this happen, but no one could stop it. That is the sacred sword choosing its own master. Can you stop it? Even if you could, would you be willing to step forward? Robbing someone of their wealth was akin to murdering their parents. The significance of the imperial army to a martial artist was even greater than wealth and power. Obstructing a martial artist from obtaining the imperial army was even more severe than exterminating his entire family. To directly oppose Sun Lang, was he tired of living? They could only watch helplessly as they calculated the next strategic adjustments in their hearts. At least at the moment, no one could do anything. The people could only passively watch all of this, witnessing with their own eyes a scene that was bound to be recorded in the history books. A legend of a generation had come to an end, and the Sword Saint of Hutu had passed away. He had left behind his legacy, and right in the imperial palace, under the watchful eyes of the public, General Shunsei had displayed the star-suppressing sacred power and triggered the sacred sword to choose its own master. He would become a new legend, the first double or even triple sword saint in the history of the empire. The sacred sword turned into a stream of light and swooped down from the sky, letting out a joyful sword hum as it rushed towards Sun Lang. The sacred sword, the head of the 7 luminaries, the sacred sword that was named after the empire, the peerless divine sword that made the blood of thousands of martial artists boil, and the most powerful deterrent force of the empire at this moment, was like a bitch that threw herself into Sun Lang's arms without reservation or dignity. So angry, so angry. The empire was founded on martial arts, and the famous people present were all martial artists. They all had the imperial army and had a deep attachment to the imperial army. With their identity, status, and knowledge, they had also dreamed of wielding the sacred sword and becoming the sword master of the 7 luminaries. Now, seeing the head of the imperial army throw herself at Sun Lang without saying anything, these important people had mixed feelings. It was even more uncomfortable than seeing a peerless beauty in the world throw herself at an ordinary man. Damn it! What was so good about Sun Lang? Would the body of a virgin be more attractive to the imperial army? Everyone was gnashing their teeth in their hearts, feeling extremely indignant. Some people were even thinking of other ideas. They absolutely couldn't let Sun Lang take all the advantages. How could they let one person take 2 sacred swords, right? They would not let go of the earth's sacred sword, but at least he had a hand over the fire's sacred sword. In their view, there was no comparison between the sacred sword of Mars and the sacred sword of Star. They were both of the 7 luminaries, but the earth's sacred sword's status was above the other swords. Sun Lang would definitely not reject the earth's sacred sword's choice of master. In this world, there was no martial artist who could reject it. The sacred sword of Star descended from the sky with the power of the earth and the unparalleled brilliance of the imperial army. As long as Sun Lang extended his hand, a new legend would immediately be born, and the reputation and status of General Shunsei would soar once again. This was like a pie falling from the sky, and no matter what everyone's mood was, they could only watch at this moment. In the majestic imperial city, in the palace of the sovereign, the eunuchs, palace maids, and guards in the inner palace raised their heads in confusion. Empress's face was filled with resentment and resentment. The crown prince was pleasantly surprised, and the crown prince's subordinates were uncertain. Many civil and military officials were in place, and the imperial bureaucrats all had different expressions: jealousy, surprise, bewilderment, fear, and contemplation. All kinds of expressions were mirrors that reflected the desires of people. The sacred sword was in the sky, Sun Lang was on the ground, and General Shunsei was raising his head. The sacred sword descended, and the legend was about to converge. If a national painter had left this scene on paper, it would definitely be a famous painting passed down through the ages. Everyone held their breaths, waiting for the convergence of heaven and earth. Under the gaze of the entire imperial city, the outer court, and the inner palace, General Shunsei leaped up to meet the sacred sword descending from the sky. The radiance of the earth's sacred sword was obscured, and the legend gradually rose. Under the complicated gazes of everyone, Sun Lang sent the sword of star flying with a proletarian flying kick. As a result, everyone's expressions changed from astonishment to tears, and from tears to screams. The current scene was even more like a famous painting than the previous scene. Sun Lang had sent the sacred sword of earth flying with a kick, sent the sacred sword of earth flying with a kick, sent the sacred sword of earth flying with a kick, sent the sacred sword of earth flying with a kick. All this happened too suddenly. Moreover, it was too unexpected. So much so that the people who saw all this blinked their eyes hard, even thinking that they were hallucinating. They looked at the sacred sword of earth flying back into the sky, their expressions blank. It was simply like witnessing with their own eyes a devastatingly beautiful woman, unparalleled in the world, with an expression of unforgettable love, throwing herself into the arms of an ordinary-looking fat otaku. Before they had time to be jealous and make sarcastic remarks, they saw the fat otaku raise his hand and send the beautiful woman flying with a blow, shouting, "You coquettish slut only want my fat, hurry up and get away from me." They were completely unable to understand and completely unable to accept this. What the F***CK was going on here? Sun Lang gracefully landed on the ground. The sacred sword was kicked far away, but the Sword of Stars was like an honest person who persevered. No matter how many times it was abused, it still stubbornly chased after its goddess. It flew a circle in the air and then charged toward Sun Lang. Flames rose, and the Sword of Confusion appeared in Sun Lang's hand. The blazing flames turned into a blazing barrier, blocking the path of the sacred sword of Earth Radiance. Sun Lang said with a sincere expression, "I know you like me a lot and want me to be your master, but the entire court knows that I, Sun Lang, am a pure and loyal man. Look, I already have a sacred sword, and it's the death of the current emperor, and it's even bestowed upon me by the previous emperor. It's not very suitable for me to hold two sacred swords by myself. Don't pester me anymore. I'm also not interested in you." F***CK? This person was so despicable. Hearing this full man spout nonsense, many of the hungry men were very angry. These words drew even more hatred than Jack Ma's words, but after the initial indignation, they felt much better. Because Sun Lang had rejected the sacred sword of Earth Radiance's choice of master. This meant that he still had reason. He understood that after accepting the sacred sword and becoming the new sword saint of the kingdom, the balance of power in the court would be broken. His own reputation and influence would swell to the extent that it would arouse the vigilance of other powers. This was not conducive to uniting the majority and resisting the imperial power. Everyone understood this logic, but understanding and doing were two different things. Giving up the favor of the sacred sword of Earth Radiance and the countless hidden benefits was undoubtedly a difficult decision, for a first-rank official of the court, it was the same. As expected of the commander of war, many people sighed in their hearts. He really was a famous general of the dynasty, a hero of Tianyuan. To be able to be so decisive, in the blink of an eye, he had defeated the great temptation of the sacred sword of Earth Radiance. Well, heart of stone, calm and wise. No wonder he couldn't coax a woman. The sacred sword of Earth Radiance was still persevering in the shield constructed by Sun Lang. It still hadn't given up. Don't be like this. Don't be like this. You have to be more dignified. Sun Lang continued to persuade it earnestly. Although your master gave me the star-suppressing secret method, he didn't want me to be the next sword saint of the kingdom. I'm not being modest. How can I be the sword saint of the kingdom, as Empress said, a traitor with bad intentions? I just promised your former master that I would pass on the unique skills of the Sword of Earth Radiance. If something happened to him, I would help him find a successor. What the F***CK? What the F***CK? What the F***CK? All the dog eyes lit up at the same time. Even the most shrewd, experienced, and prudent old man suddenly raised his head. Awesome. Refusing to be the sword saint of the kingdom, but holding the choice of the next sword saint of the kingdom, not only could he avoid putting himself at the center of the storm, but he could also use this as a bargaining chip to win over powerful allies. Who in the world today could resist the temptation of the position of the sword saint of the kingdom? This was too King sneaky, but they were indeed tempted. All the officials in the court, regardless of their relationship with Sun Lang, were tempted. If Sun Lang could really interfere with the selection of the sword saint of the kingdom, they would pay any price. At this moment, the emperor, who had been silent all this time, could no longer sit still. Grand Preceptor Crown Prince. His bleak voice revealed a trace of weariness and sadness. Although his injuries had healed, the death of the sword saint of the kingdom seemed to have dealt him a great blow. Seeing the Crown Prince helping the emperor out, all the officials and servants outside bowed again. Long live the emperor! The shouts gathered together and shook the royal palace. Their voices shot into the clouds. No matter how the people felt about the emperor waking up, when they saw this scene, they could only kneel and shout. This was the majesty and power of imperial power. This was the power of tradition and order. This was the iron rule that had been established for thousands of years. Sun Lang blocked the Earth Radiance Sacred Sword while holding the Fire Radiance Sacred Sword. Greetings, your majesty. The two of them looked at each other in the air. The stage had already been set up. This was a confrontation between the two of them. Only the two main actors on the stage knew the truth. The audience was watching in confusion. General Shunsei said, "I didn't expect the Sword Saint of the Kingdom to do such a thing. I still can't believe it. I don't know why he used such a decisive method." Speaking of this matter, the emperor's eyes turned red. He sighed and said, "Just now, the Grand Preceptor was not here. The Sword Saint of the nation had already told me the cause and effect. He said that he suffered an extremely serious internal injury when he was in the Great Bear Mountain. He had been in seclusion to recuperate for the past 2 years and had not shown any signs of improvement. Now that his injury has worsened, there is no hope for him to recover. Why not give up his broken body and save my life? Sai, I deeply regret it. I'm deeply hurt." After saying this, he beat his chest and stamped his feet, looking sad. Everyone said in unison, "My condolences, your majesty." Sun Lang was just thinking of saying something polite and, in a roundabout way, mocking the emperor. Before he could speak, the emperor said, "General, the sword saint of the kingdom left in a hurry, but he did leave some instructions." He glanced at the hoodoo holy sword floating in the air, and reminiscence appeared in his eyes. He said that the Shunsei general, Sun Lang, is loyal and pure and can be entrusted with important tasks. The position of the national sword saint cannot be left empty. Only you are qualified. Grand Preceptor, don't decline anymore. Sun Lang was stunned. "Your Majesty, when the sword saint of the nation discussed and taught me the star-suppressing secret art, he didn't say that. He said that if something were to happen to him in the future, I would like to pass on his lifelong knowledge and find a successor to wield the Hutu divine sword. The emperor shook his head and said, "Times have changed. The eunuchs, maids, and imperial physicians in the palace can all testify to the Sage of Swords' last words. I want to resolve his worries. Grand Preceptor, please don't refuse." Sun Lang waved his hand and said, "No, I already have the fire sword, and it was bestowed by the late emperor himself. Your Majesty, I have heard that the emperor rules the world with filial piety. You can't mess around." Li Guangyuan's eyes flashed with anger. He said patiently, "Times have changed. When the late emperor showed his divinity, the national sword saint was still alive. Now the situation is different. If the late emperor is in heaven, he will definitely approve of you taking over the mantle of the national sword saint. That's not necessarily true." Sun Lang said slowly, "Why don't we bring the sword to the imperial ancestral temple and ask the late emperor to think about it?" Everyone looked at the emperor and Sun Lang in a daze. Emperors couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, if he doesn't want it, then don't give it to him. There are countless heroes in the empire. Can't we find a new sword master of the Hutu's sword?" Sun Lang was all smiles as he said, "Yes, Her Majesty the Empress is the most sensible. Are you kidding me? Who wants a sword? If it falls into my hands, and you say that the holy sword is broken in the blink of an eye, then you want to put the blame on my head. Wouldn't that be terrible? I'm a good man. How can I be framed by you? Something seems wrong. Forget it. Anyway, that's what I mean." He said seriously, "Your Majesty, Empress, in my opinion, the matter of the sword saint of the Hutu's sword could be put aside for now. There are more important things to do now. For example, the national sword saint. Why did he die? Who left the internal injuries? Forgive me for being blunt, but there is something fishy." Chapter 1082. For example, the nation-guarding sword saint. Why did he die? Who left the internal injury? Forgive me for speaking bluntly, but there's something fishy about it. Sun Lang's tone was very respectful, and his choice of words was very particular. He called himself a minister and not a great minister, which was very respectful. But the meaning behind his words was not polite at all. Not only did he reject the sword of suppressing stars recognition, he also wanted to use this as a pretext to make a fuss and investigate this matter thoroughly. Then, he channeled his fire, spiritual energy, and restrained his earth element. The buzzing sword of suppressing star that was flying around in the air lost its target and slowly fell to the ground, returning to the nation-guarding sword saint's armor. Was it just an empty shell? Sun Lang thought to himself. If the sword of suppressing star still persistently pestered him after he restrained his earth's spiritual energy, then he would definitely accept the sword of suppressing star without saying a word. Then he would turn around and attack, killing the ancestor the devil that was hiding inside. Then he would rush into the palace and kill the emperor. As long as these two old things died, he would win. But now, the sword of suppressing star seemed to be just an empty shell. Then, he definitely could not take the blame. He looked at the emperor, and a provocative look flashed in his eyes. "You and the ancestor the devil have put on such a good show. You have to see if I cooperate or not." And the emperor, facing the sunlight, the emperor's body swayed, and he collapsed into the crown prince's arms. Although Li Jiansheng wanted nothing more than to hold his father in his arms and strangle the emperor to death, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he could only be filial. He anxiously shouted, "Father Emperor! Father!" The Empress Dowager and Empress also rushed forward and shouted, "Imperial Physician!" The scene suddenly became chaotic. The palace servants and ministers gathered inside, and outside the Yuji Hall let out a noisy uproar. The imperial physician's most brilliant physicians gathered and checked the emperor's pulse. A moment later, the imperial physician came to a conclusion. Although His Majesty's injuries have healed, his body is still very weak. "Oh shit, you old thing." Sun Lang took a few steps forward, his eyes flashing with malice. It was a pity that the emperor had probably been transformed by the devil of the ancestor and was immune to the power of the earth. Otherwise, he would have taken advantage of the chaos to poke a finger. Li Guangyuan collapsed in the crown prince's arms. His breathing was weak and his eyes were blank. It was clear that he was very weak. Perhaps it was because he had used up all his strength to answer Sun Lang, or perhaps the sudden death of the sword saint of the earth had exhausted him. He said softly, I'm a little tired, Sun Lang said sincerely. Your Majesty, you don't have to worry. The Crown Prince is in charge of everything outside the court. We will do our best to assist him. You can close your eyes in peace. The Empress glared at him angrily. Sun Lang, on the other hand, had the face of a loyal official. He did not have the slightest intention of cursing the Emperor. He asked again, then the matter of the sword saint of the country. The Emperor closed his eyes and soon breathed evenly. The imperial physician took his pulse again and announced the good news. His Majesty's pulse is stable and his vital energy is abundant. He is just sleeping to rest his spirit. When his vital energy is restored, he will wake up. After all, he needs to rest. The Empress Dowager said unhappily, His Majesty's skills are profound and his body is healthy. How can he be so weak? The imperial physician said softly, It is the sword of time. Although Jimu is virtuous, there are two sides to everything. The wood of immortality can nourish and heal, but can also absorb life. His Majesty's vital energy and vital energy were absorbed by the wood of immortality. So he needs to rest, he added. Now that his injuries are healed, His Majesty's condition will improve immediately. After all, the Emperor's martial arts are extraordinary and his vital energy is endless. With the sacred medicine in the palace to replenish his vital energy and blood, he will recover soon. The Empress Dowager was relieved. Then help His Majesty into the palace to have a good rest. Also, ask the people gathered here to disperse. It is so noisy and annoying. Sun Lang said, Crown Prince, state affairs are important. You are still the regent. Please come out and take control of the situation. As soon as he finished speaking, Empress said, Humph, His Majesty has woken up. That regent position can be suspended. Crown Prince, how have you performed these days? When His Majesty wakes up, he will judge. Her tone was quite proud. She was the happiest person when the Emperor woke up. After all, before this, she had already known about Sun Lang's wild ambition. Now that His Majesty had woken up, it was time to settle the score, including this so-called Crown Prince. Humph! He was deeply favored by the Emperor, but he was mixed up with Sun Lang, the traitor of the state. Let's see how long he can be the Crown Prince. Before the Crown Prince could speak, Sun Lang said, Empress, the Crown Prince has been respectful, modest, and respectful these days. He is neither arrogant nor rash, and has the demeanor of a wise ruler. All of the civil and military officials in court have seen how well he has handled the regent. Naturally, they will report it to His Majesty and ask His Majesty to judge. There is no need for you to worry about this. Apart from this, you have spoken nonsense in court today. You have targeted the important officials everywhere. You have frequently called them traitors, criticized heroes, and looked down on the generals of the court. It is truly arrogant and domineering. Your various actions will be reported to His Majesty. When His Majesty wakes up, he will make his own judgment. He revealed his shining teeth and smiled warmly. Just you wait. The General of Divine Strategies didn't control his volume and just said it calmly. At least, the people around the Emperor heard it. Fuck, 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 fuck. Most people lowered their heads and pretended not to hear. Empress was both shocked and angry. The Empress Dowager was even more shocked. She finally understood why her daughter-in-law was so angry. The Empress Dowager said angrily, Sun Lang, is this how you speak to Empress? Sun Lang said calmly, Did I say something wrong when I asked Empress to wait for His Majesty to wake up? Then he turned around and said to the officials waiting quietly outside the hall, His Majesty's body is not well and needs to rest. We, the officials, will participate in court politics as before and deal with state affairs. The Crown Prince will be regent, and the officials will assist him. When His Majesty wakes up, we will then hand over power. Today, The sword saint of the nation has passed away. There are many suspicious points about his death. Since he is the hero of the world, he must give an explanation to the people of the world. The cause and effect of this matter must be investigated thoroughly. Apart from this, the divine sword cannot be left empty. I have the star-suppressing secret technique. I am looking for a successor for the sword saint of the nation. This matter should also be put on the agenda. Also, he took a deep breath and looked at the emperor being carefully carried into the palace by the imperial physicians and eunuchs. He smiled. It's great that His Majesty wakes up. Empress stared coldly at Sun Lang and sneered. It's too late for you to say nice words now. Why do you have to be so hypocritical and make me look down on you? Your Majesty has misunderstood Zhu Chen's intentions. Sun Lang said slowly, I am indeed happy that His Majesty wakes up, because I can finally ask His Majesty some things face to face and get the answers I want. Because there are some things that only His Majesty can answer us. Was it His Majesty who ordered Lingmu Li to assassinate me in the Great Bear Mountain? Why did the wood sword saint who died in my hands appear in the imperial capital again? There are still many questions. He still did not hide his voice. He calmly said these words in front of everyone in the palace. His expression was calm and fearless. Empress was shocked and shouted, Sun Lang, how dare you? She realized that she had underestimated this guy's courage. After all, she was only an empress who lived in the depths of the palace and did not understand the fearlessness and perseverance of a hero. In her view, even if Sun Lang dared to accuse the monarch in court, it was only because the emperor was unconscious and could not see things that he dared to be arrogant and domineering. Now that the emperor had awakened, all of his tricks should have nowhere to hide. He should have his tail between his legs and be careful from now on. She did not expect that this guy still dared to jump in front of the royal family after His Majesty had woken up. Sun Lang said in a low voice, I've always been bold, but I'm not saying such words here because I'm bold, but because I've returned to the Imperium after 2 years not only to seek justice for myself, but also to ask Your Majesty why on behalf of those who will never come back. Why can't the king be questioned? Even an emperor had 7 emotions and 6 desires. He would also have dark thoughts. As a human, he had unparalleled power. Therefore, he was the one who should be questioned and monitored the most in this world. This is the responsibility and mission of a minister. Not only should we supervise the mistakes of the king and deter him, we should also punish him. The empress said sternly, You still want to punish your emperor? Sun Lang replied in the same harsh tone, Why not? My doubts about His Majesty are still valid. If the Wood Radiant Sword Saint was ordered by His Majesty, and if His Majesty's coma was just a farce directed by himself, then I have to ask, what does the death of the Sword Saint count for? Your Highness Empress, now that things have come to this, it is no longer Sun Lang's personal grudge. All the schemes, deceptions, lies, and schemes, I will find out the truth no matter who tries to stop me. No matter who the culprit is. It is great that His Majesty woke up today. He took a step forward and stared coldly at the Empress of the nation. He said in a Sunran tone, Let him wait. After that, he left Empress, who was in a sorry state and had a trace of fear in her eyes, where she was in shock and anger. Wherever he went, the crowd, whether it was the palace servants or the ministers, all stepped back. Everyone had a complicated look in their eyes. Empress was angrily shouting for the imperial guards to arrest the traitor, but no one dared to act rashly. People looked at Sun Lang, and there was also an inexplicable feeling in their hearts, as if a seed had been quietly planted. No matter what, after what had happened today, the conflict between Sun Lang and His Majesty had been officially put on the table. An even more intense conflict could happen at any time. After leaving the inner palace, Sun Lang met Qin Xiong. His Highness invites you to the Ministry of Imperial Censorate, Qin Xiong said concisely. There seems to be a great discovery. Chapter 1083. Ministry of Finance? Sun Lang raised his eyebrows. What had just happened had shaken the capital. First, Sword Saint Hutu came out of seclusion then confronted General Shunsei outside the gate of Heaven Bearing, then broke into the palace, and finally His Majesty recovered. This series of changes was earth-shattering enough to attract everyone's attention. But Empress was still nowhere to be seen. This was obviously very strange. Let's not talk about other things. Now that your father has woken up, where have you run off to? In the Empire, loyalty and filial piety were the most important personal qualities in society, especially for officials. Now that His Majesty had woken up, Empress, as the daughter of a general and the emperor, was nowhere to be seen. If someone took the opportunity to write a book, even with her power, she would be put in a passive position. But she just didn't come. Even if she had broken off relations with the old emperor, she should at least pretend, right? Sun Lang glanced at the stupefied Qin Xiong. I say, the gatekeeper, Mr. Qin, the door god. Qin Xiong's tone was emotionless. Is the door god referring to a lowly general? Yes. A lowly general isn't a door god. What are you talking about? Don't you know? I'd like to hear the details. Sun Lang started the conversation. The story goes like this. After the Tianyuan War, Empress Tensei couldn't sleep at night because she had done too many guilty things. Even if she did sleep, she would have nightmares. She dreamed all day long that the souls of those she murdered would come to take revenge, such as Mr. Jia of Summer Province, a marshal of the 6 armies, and a lover surnamed Sun who must not be named. Every night, she would dream that her enemy would come to her with a huge penis and play out all kinds of exciting scenes in other areas. Over time, she became very weak, but there was nothing she could do. Therefore, he gathered his subordinates to discuss this matter. After everyone chatted for a while, they came up with a plan. They specially ordered General Qin Xiong and General Yuqi Jingda to put on Dark Tong Douai's dark fantasy suit and stand guard in front of the Empress's door at night in the posture of F***CKU. This deterred the vengeful spirits who came for revenge. Therefore, His Highness Empress could finally sleep in peace. Later, they felt that it was too troublesome, so they put up posters of the 2 generals on the door. It was just as effective. After that, this custom slowly spread. Later generations called the 2 generals the door gods. After that, General Shinsei blinked and asked, "How was it?" Qin Xiong was still expressionless. Commander of war, in order to set His Highness up, put himself in danger. Sun Lang did not pay attention to this sarcasm, nor did he care about Qin Xiong's calm reaction. One of his favorite things in life was to think of ways to make Honest Man and San Wu, who were not good with words, fly into a rage. So he continued, "This story is not finished yet. In fact, it is just the beginning. There's a long story behind it. Do you want to hear it?" Qin Xiong said lightly, but His Highness asked you to quickly go to the Ministry of Finance. Sun Lang tilted his head and said, "But I did not agree to go." The 2 stopped and looked at each other. Qin Xiong's expression did not change. Sun Lang blinked his big cute eyes and did not say a word. "What do you want?" Sun Lang snapped his fingers. "Listen to my story. As you command." "No, you have to beg me to tell you a story." A lowly general asked Commander of War to tell him a story. A long story with 100 chapters. You have to write 10,000 words for each chapter. "General, you are too much of a bully." "Then why are you not angry or scolding me?" "I am afraid of being beaten." "TSK," Sun Lang said resentfully, "lead the way. We will talk as we walk." "Yes. By the way, the Dongshan Divine Land, Commander of War, a lowly general has something to say. I don't know if I should say it." "Go ahead." "Previously, you said that there were vengeful spirits looking for Her Highness the Crown Princess for revenge. You said that Her Highness the Crown Princess dreamed of vengeful spirits coming to her every night. However, those vengeful spirits seem to be you. Why wasn't there anyone else?" "Because my hatred for her is as high as the sky and as deep as the sea. Then there should be many other men. There are even some who are not human." "Hey!" Qin Xiong suddenly stopped and looked at Sun Lang solemnly. "Can you let Her Highness go?" Sun Lang did not turn his head. He said lightly, "What do you think? Then Tensei Province will fight to the last man. Up to you." A lot of people will die. I don't care. You don't care if everyone in Tensei province dies, but do you not care about your former subordinates? You can't do it. We can do it. It's just a matter of numbers. Her Majesty can do it too. It's also a matter of numbers. If you let Her Highness go, there might be less blood, or even, Qin Xiong said slowly, Tensei province can replace Shinto province to bleed. Sun Lang finally turned his head. Qin Xiong's eyes were as firm as ever and calm. Commander of War's promise is worth more than 1,000 gold. He said, as long as you nod, my life is yours. Many people are willing to sell their lives to you. Just say the word. Sun Lang asked, is this what she wants? Qin Xiong said, Commander of War is asking the obvious. How can Her Highness do such a thing? Sun Lang said lightly, you know her very well? Qin Xiong nodded and said, of course. We have always fought side by side, entrusted our lives to each other, and trusted each other. We can die for her without hesitation, and she will never let us die. General Shunsei sneered. So you also foresaw that she would act against me? Qin Xiong was speechless. Sun Lang didn't say anything else. He seemed to have sunk into some kind of reminiscing contemplation. After returning to the imperial capital, he often sank into his memories. Many of the memories that had been sealed for a long time came alive. He was reminiscing, but more importantly, remembering. Because he came back to do things. Because he came back to turn some things into memories. Memories forever. In the entire Tensei province, there are not many people who can catch my eye. You are one of them. After a long time, Sun Lang said slowly, for the sake of our old friendship, I will say a few words. I advise you to trust her as always. If it is really as you say, that your ruler and minister get along, that you treat each other with sincerity, that you understand each other, then you should trust your general, right? Trust that he will make the right decision. So follow him, and not do something in private, in the name of what is good for her, and prepare to sacrifice yourself. This is the truth, right? Qin Xiong was startled and then fell silent. Think about it carefully. Sun Lang hesitated for a moment. In the end, he nonchalantly added, if it's Her Highness the Empress concubine whom you all trust, she will definitely make the right choice, right? After saying this, he said lightly, let's go to the Ministry of Finances. Qin Xiong came back to his senses and looked deeply at Sun Lang. Yes. That's right, Door God. Did you bring water? Yes, there's a water bag on the horse's back. Commander of War, do you want to drink water? No. I mean, wash your ears. I'm going to tell you a story. Qin Xiong rode the horse, and the general rode the carriage. The two arrived at the Ministry of Finances one after another. Now, the Royal Trust Organization had been fully taken over by the swift and decisive Empress. The people inside and outside the Ministry of Finances were Tensei's people. They controlled all the important links of the Ministry of Finances as quickly as possible to ensure that Tensei province had this rich treasure bowl in their hands. When they heard that Sun Lang had come, the real power figures of Tensei province all came out to greet him. No matter how sharp the conflict between Tensei and Shunsei was, everyone had to maintain the most basic etiquette and dignity on the surface. After all, respecting the opponent was respecting oneself. This was a tradition and rule that had been formed for hundreds of years. Hey, little friends, hello everyone. You are all familiar faces, so I don't have to introduce myself. After all, everyone knows who I am, and I also know you. After all, you have all been beaten by me, ha ha. Thus, they were greeted with such a forthright laughter. General Shunsei came up to greet them as if they were familiar with each other. He cupped his hands in salute, looking like a person who had a lot of friends and relatives all over the world. Everyone was just thinking about whether to force a smile to deal with him, but now they didn't have to think so much. Everyone's face darkened. Without waiting for them to recover, they heard this fellow continue. All right, I'm here today to bring bad news. His Majesty has woken up. His injuries have healed. How is it? Are you surprised? You sent out all your troops to take over the Ministry of Finances, and then the Emperor woke up. When I think that His Majesty is likely to settle accounts with you after the autumn, I feel anxious for you. Everyone's face darkened even more. Looking at your expressions, you must be scolding me in your hearts, telling me not to be complacent. His Majesty will deal with me first when he wakes up. Is that what you think? It's the clothes. It's too simple. It's too childish. I don't get along with His Majesty. Whether I offend him or not, I will have to fight with him in the end. But what about you? Because of the greed in your heart, because of that dark desire, you actually lost your mind and did this kind of thing. Sigh. Everyone's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Many people's joints cracked, and their fists clenched so tightly that it made cracking sounds. The generals with bad tempers wanted to fight with this grandson without caring about anything else. Mother Asterisk Kerr, you're not done yet. At this time, General Tensei's voice came from afar. Don't be noisy. Quickly come over. Sun Lang threw a coquettish glance at the crowd and said shyly, Your Highness misses me. Sigh. Being too charming is also very troublesome. I really can't help it. You guys guard the door. Don't eavesdrop. Then, under everyone's gaze, General Shansei was like a happy little deer. He skipped through the crowd and walked through the door of the Ministry of Finances. Cheng Yaojin said angrily, I want to beat him. Why don't we? Before he finished speaking, he saw Qin Xiong's lonely figure walking alone in a certain direction. Hey, old Qin, Uncle Qin, where are you going? Qin Xiong turned around with a blank expression. After a pause of 1 or 2 seconds, he said in a daze, My mind is a bit messy. I have to sort out. Cheng Yaojin pounced over and shouted, What did Sun Lang do to you? He told a story. Qin Xiong showed a subtle expression. Do you want to hear it? On this side, Sun Lang entered the Ministry of Finances and listened to the voice to determine the location. After passing through several halls, he finally saw the beautiful figure of Empress. Ah, Your Highness, I'm afraid I have to tell you a piece of exciting news. Not long ago, the great sword saint sacrificed himself and used his life as the price to cleanse the sword of time on His Majesty's body, saving our emperor. How is it? Are you happy? Empress said coldly, Who is that sword saint of Hutu? Sun Lang said with an exaggerated expression, Of course it's the hero who came from the west at the moment of crisis, descended on the great barren mountain, turned the tide, and shattered the last counterattack of the sky demon. Admiral Tensei ignored his mockery and said with a cold expression, Even if he can wear heavy armor and cover his face, this so-called sword saint of Hutu must be capable. Otherwise, he can't survive one move from you. Who is he? Could it be Ling Muley in disguise? How could father abandon him so easily? Could it be? She stared at Sun Lang with an extremely serious expression. Could it be him? Sun Lang asked who. Empress didn't answer. She looked a little irritated. During the honeymoon period, she and the emperor got along well with each other, and the relationship between father and daughter was harmonious. There were many things that she didn't think carefully at all. Now she was estranged and guarded in her heart. When she looked back at everything with a scrutinizing gaze, she found many things that made her uneasy. That night, the emperor rarely lost his composure and revealed unusually twisted emotions, ringing the alarm bells in the empress concubine's heart. The general of heavenly strategies suddenly realized that there were many invisible webs of conspiracy around him. From a long, long time ago, the emperor seemed to have begun his plan. Empress couldn't guess his purpose for the time being. She just sorted out some broken clues. But just from these broken clues, she could smell an extremely dangerous signal. Admiral Tensei looked at the man opposite him. Sun Lang. He must know something, but he won't say it easily. She took a deep breath. I think we have to have a good talk. We have to talk frankly and even exchange some information. After all, we have a common enemy now. Sun Lang was non-committal and still had a sloppy look on his face. Damn it. Empress was annoyed in her heart. She knew what Sun Lang was thinking. Now the situation was better than him. Sun Lang was not in a hurry, but she was a little anxious. This meant that the initiative had changed hands. She had to show some sincerity first. I'll give you a piece of information for free first to show my sincerity. She said, The person who pretended to be the sword saint of Hutu is definitely not nobody. He can face you directly, which means that he is powerful enough. Even for the emperor, such a person is not a pawn that he can sacrifice at will. The other party died without saying anything. Generally speaking, there's only one possibility. In fact, he didn't die. He just transferred his vitality in a silent and strange way. This reminds me of someone. Chapter 1084. Mr. Zhang. Sun Lang raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who's that?" At first, I thought he was a wise man who came to seek refuge with me. Later, I realized that he was someone sent by the emperor to assist and supervise me. But now, Emperor Concubine's eyes flashed with a trace of haze. It might be something beyond my imagination. Sun Lang pulled a chair over and sat opposite Empress. He tapped his fingers on the table and fell in a deep thought. He recalled all the things that had happened in the past. Fragments of the past quickly appeared in his eyes. All the unusual points, all the suspicious points. But memories are accompanied by pain. Memories often remind you of some things. Sadness, hatred, sadness, and anger. Sun Lang opened his eyes. The fierce anger and killing intent pierced Empress's heart. General Shin's voice turned cold. Bai Castle. Sun Lang still could not let go of Bai Yue's death. This stupid old man accepted a wrong order in the Great Bear Mountain. He lived in pain, self-blame, sadness, and despair for the last 2 years of his life. He was suspected and used as a pawn by the emperor. He even lost his integrity in his old age. At the last moment of his life, he suffered one blow after another and was betrayed. He was also one of the people who could never come back. Sun Lang wanted to ask the emperor why on his behalf, and the woman in front of him was also one of the culprits. General Tensei was silent for a moment. Then he nodded calmly. Yes, he was also in Bai Castle at that time. The scene of that day appeared in Sun Lang's mind. At that time, he sensed abnormal energy fluctuations on the mountain near Bai Castle. Then, the sword soul in Bai Yue's body was awakened. He immediately rushed to the mountain where the abnormal energy fluctuations were coming from. However, he found that the creature hiding there had completed its disintegration in a strange way. It did not seem like a suicide. It was a diversion. It seemed that the mysterious man who had inexplicably collapsed was undoubtedly the so-called Mr. Zhang. Sun Lang asked, "What do you know about him?" "Very few." The Empress concubine shook her head and said, "With my personality, I naturally wouldn't be at ease using him. I would definitely investigate him both openly and secretly, but it's a pity that the results were few and far between. It was as though he had popped out from a crack in a rock, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. The first few spies from the Heavenly Policy Hall were sent out, but they all returned in defeat. Who else could awaken Rushu?" Sun Lang sneered in his heart. Empress could not figure out Mr. Zhang's background, but Sun Lang had a rough idea. After finding some clues that day, he had a rough idea of the mysterious person who had awakened Rushu. In any case, it must have something to do with the devil Yuan Zhu. Then the question was this Mr. Zhang the devil Yuan Zhu himself, or was he a lackey? I don't know this Mr. Zhang, so he shouldn't have appeared during the war. Otherwise, if he contacted you, he wouldn't have avoided me. Sun Lang asked, "When did he first come to see you?" Empress thought for a moment and said, "About a year ago. He should be a lackey or a doppelganger. In the Battle of the Great Barren Mountain, he had severely damaged the Hoodoo Holy Sword and knocked the devil Yuan Zhu into a coma. Then, the imperial court covered up the cover and stuffed Princess Pingyang into the heavy armor of the nation-guarding sword sage as a last resort. She pretended to be the owner of the star-defending sword for 2 years. During this period, she got along with her sword day and night. If the devil Yuan Zhu woke up, Pingyang would be the first to know. And according to Pingyang, the time when the progenitor demon spirit woke up was only a few months ago. It was on the night when Tai Jia entered Mingzhou, when he pulled the string of the thunder bow and shocked the imperial astronomer. The devil Yuan Zhu sensed it and woke up from a long sleep with this primer. And before this, the emperor concubine already knew this so-called Mr. Zhang. Therefore, it was impossible for Mr. Zhang to be the one traveling outside. And if he was a lackey, To be trusted and appointed by the devil Yuan Zhu as a lackey, he must not be an ordinary character. According to the other party's ability to transfer and split at will, this Mr. Zhang was most likely not human. To be able to wake up Rushu, the source of his power was most likely the same as the gold sword's spiritual root. Most importantly, he or a lackey like him must be extremely rare and hard to come by. They would not be everywhere on the street. The devil Yuan Zhu not only had to have a plan, but also to avoid being suspected by the emperor. His pawns must be of quality rather than quantity. In summary, it was not difficult to guess the origin of this Mr. Zhang. Sun Lang's eyes gradually became gloomy. He slightly exerted force with his fingers, and his nails carved deep marks on the hard table. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Gold, wood, water, fire, earth, sun, and moon. Rushu had been killed. Earth was the devil Yuan Zhu. The sword of confusion first fell into the hands of Qi Lianyan, and then was obtained by him. For the time being, no abnormalities were found. Hikari Kensei and the Moon Sword Saint looked normal for the time being, and the Holy Sword had always been in their hands. Then there was the Wood Saint swordsman, Muley, who was officially declared dead in the Great Barren Mountains, but was not actually dead. Although Sun Lang had witnessed Muley's escape in the Great Barren Mountains, he had seen the Wood Saint swordsman being manipulated by the progenitor demon spirit not long ago. Most likely, Muley was indeed dead. And most likely, he died because of the sword spirit's possession. Emperor saw this so-called Mr. Zhang a year ago. The timing seemed to match. Well, it was most likely him. The wood sword spirit, his name should be Gomong. Thinking of this, Sun Lang's mood was a little chaotic. He barely suppressed the sudden irritation and said slowly, I think this Mr. Zhang seems to be related to the dead Muley. About this, I disagree. Emperor spoke. Just now, I found something in the ancient books of the Ministry of Imperial Finances. She stacked up several books on the table and pushed them in front of Sun Lang. Her eyes flashed with a sigh. I didn't want to show it to you, but after thinking about it, Sun Lang reached out and flipped through them a few times. His eyes gradually became gloomy. He suddenly looked up, and a violent, murderous look flashed by. Are you planning to kill with a borrowed knife? No, Empress said calmly. It's up to you to believe it or not, because the truth is there. Sun Lang stood up slowly. If I find out that you're lying to me, General Tensei shook her head and said, there's no benefit because it's too easy to verify. Instead, I want to advise you to calm down. Don't let anger get to your head and make the situation irreparable. She met Sun Lang's cold eyes with a calm and fearless expression. If you rush into the palace and kill the emperor now, an earth-shattering war will definitely break out in the capital. At that time, the country will collapse and the divine land will sink. There will be no winner, especially for you. What you lose will be far greater than what you gain. Sun Lang said, if this really happens, you should be happy, right? Empress sighed and shook her head. You don't understand. This is my country, and I also want to know the truth. Sun Lang was stupefied for a moment, and then turned to leave. I'm going to find Xinyaohua. Chapter 1085. Sun Lang went to the Shen mansion without alerting anyone. He came to the embroidery building where Shun Yaohua lived. It was quiet here. The lonely courtyard and the lonely building seemed to be isolated from the world. There was only a lonely silhouette sitting by the window. Hearing the footsteps, the woman turned her head. Her black hair slid down her shoulders. Her eyes were sad and misty, like a water lotus standing in the middle of the water. There were ripples around her. She looked very close, but also very far away. It was as if she was drifting in this empty and cold world and could leave at any time. There was no meaning in living on her. She was like a walking corpse. She said softly, "You're here." Sun Lang looked at her and was silent for a full 3 breaths. "You didn't leave." He waved his hand. The books in his hand that he had found in the Imperial Censorate rose into the air and slowly fell to Xinyaohua. They were slow and steady, as if an invisible hand was gently passing them over. This effortlessly controlled object was enough to shock the strongest in the world, but the woman's expression did not change in the slightest. She raised her slender, jade-like hand and tucked the hair on the side of her face behind her ear. Then she glanced at it lightly, her clear black and white eyes rippling with a clear light. Because of the movement of her hand, Sun Lang saw the thing that the woman had been holding in her arms. It was a memorial tablet. There was a person's name written on it. Sun Lang's pupils suddenly shrank. It was as if a breeze had blown through the room. The fragrant wood floor, the beautiful utensils, and the girl's boudoir all had fine and small scratches on the surface of many things. Shen Yaohua was still unmoved. The books floated in front of her. The world's deadliest killing machine was 5 feet away from her, but her expression was still sad and misty, as if there was nothing in the world that could move her. She did not look at the books. She only sighed in a low voice. "You know," Sun Lang said, "you don't plan to explain yourself?" Shen Yaohua said softly, "I'm a stupid woman. I don't know how to lie, so you don't have to waste your energy." Sun Lang's tone became gloomy. "You actually have the face to hold his memorial tablet." The woman stared at Sun Lang. "What about you?" She held up the memorial tablet in her hands and faced it towards Sun Lang. The words on the tablet were like needles piercing into Sun Lang's heart. Shen Yaohua whispered, "Can you face him?" Sword Chi shot out. Wood chips flew everywhere. With a bang, the memorial tablet in Shen Yaohua's hand exploded into pieces and scattered all over the ground. The woman slowly lowered her head. She looked at her empty hands and the broken pieces of wood by her skirt. This sharp sword energy came like a sudden clap of thunder. Before she could react, the memorial tablet was completely destroyed, and she was not harmed at all. "What a fast sword." She actually smiled. "I should be angry, but I can't feel any anger in my heart. I just think it's natural. You even killed him. Why would you care about a small wooden tablet?" As soon as she finished speaking, a gust of wind rose. Sun Lang suddenly approached and grabbed the woman's neck. His eyes were full of anger and killing intent. "You stupid." Shen Yaohua's eyes showed pain, but she did not resist. She tried to raise her head and looked into Sun Lang's eyes. Her calm voice trembled. "Stupid? I just want to see him again." Sun Lang gritted his teeth. "The dead can't be brought back to life." "It can," Shen Yaohua repeated. "It can. It has already proved it to me." For an illusory boast, for a joke from the Arabian Nights, Sun Lang could no longer hold back his anger. "You dug out your husband's body with your own hands and gave it to that crazy bastard. You still have the face to hold his memorial tablet." In the face of Sun Lang's fury, in the face of Sun Lang's uncontrollable killing intent, Shen Yaohua still didn't have the slightest trace of fear. She slowly blinked, looking at Sun Lang in front of her. A complicated expression flashed through her eyes, as if she was sighing, as if she was mocking him, as if she was pitying him. For me, her voice seemed to be far and near, as if it was on the horizon, as if it was right in front of her. "As long as there is a slight possibility, it is worth a try. If it works, my husband will come back. If it doesn't work, then his so-called body is actually just a piece of meat that won't rot. What use is it to me?" Sun Lang suddenly raised his hand, and the surging power of his palm gathered in his hand. Even a sword sage would have his head burst open on the spot if she took his palm head on. But Shen Yaohua still looked at him with a sigh and a mocking look. She said softly, "You are not as open-minded as I am. Why is that?" She stretched out her hand with a little effort and slowly stroked Sun Lang's face. She murmured, "Can you tell me how he died? Can you tell me why you feel so guilty?" Sun Lang slowly put down his hand, let go of Shen Yaohua, and took a step back. His eyes were full of indifference and disappointment. "It's really sad," Sun Lang said Sunran. "I was careless in making friends, serving my husband, and marrying a wife." Shen Yaohua stroked her neck, where it was burning. She stared at Sun Lang and said in a soft and sad voice, "So what are you going to do? Kill me?" "My emotions persuade me not to do so," Sun Lang said coldly. "But if the situation requires it, I will." Shen Yaohua stared at him motionlessly. After a moment, she said softly, "Remember what you said?" "What do you mean?" The woman responded with a sad smile. "Let me reunite with him. Don't try to provoke me." Sun Lang said indifferently, "Now, I need you to answer a few questions." Shen Yaohua sighed softly. "No, I won't say anything." Sun Lang said coldly, "Then do you know that your husband's body was made into a new container by the emperor, carrying the soul of a madman running around?" The woman shook her head and said, "You don't understand? Then let me understand." "I'm sorry." Sun Lang took a deep breath. "Then I have to take some necessary measures." Earth suppressed water. The power of the Earth's star-suppressing force surged in, suppressing the waves of Chunxing, sensing the threat approaching. The sacred sword of water automatically counterattacked. However, the enemy it faced not only had the sacred powers of metal, fire, and earth, but also the spiritual power of Chunxing of water. There was no opponent in the world. The sacred powers of water in Shen Yaohua's body were quickly suppressed. After all, in terms of understanding and control of the sacred powers of water, Sun Lang was comparable to the most powerful sacred sword masters in history. Shen Yaohua could not be compared to him. He had studied the sacred powers of water for 2 years with the power, insight, and foundation of the strongest person in the world. He had already familiarized himself with the sacred powers of water. The woman's face gradually turned pale. She felt that the sacred powers of water in her body gradually became silent and turned into a pool of silent, stagnant water. The connection between her and the sacred sword of water was gradually broken. She only felt that Sun Lang's palm released a strong suction force, so that the sacred sword of her body began to vibrate and shake violently. Sun Lang's face was as calm as water. The blue waves rippled out layer by layer. He raised his other hand and clenched it in the air. Countless blue water threads circled around his palm and gradually solidified into the physical body of the hilt. The control of the sacred sword of water slowly fell into his hands. Soon, he would be able to take control of the sacred sword from Shen Yaohua. Stop! At this moment, 2 dazzling sword lights shone outside. The grand sun was bright, and the moon was clear. The sun and the moon were in the sky and attacked Sun Lang's back. The divine stratagem, General snorted coldly. His Mars-flowing light, blazing fire, and holy sword sharpness turned around and thrust out, entangling with the glorious sun sacred sword. For a moment, the flames entangled and changed endlessly. The moon's shadow flowed, and the tying sword quietly attacked. The 2 swords combined, and the power suddenly multiplied. A cold light flashed in Sun Lang's eyes. The sacred power of fire flowed and evolved. He used fire to create earth, and Zhenxing vital energy to create all things. He multiplied the power of the earth. Then the earth continued to be born and turned into pure gold. Gold gave birth to water. The 4 elements were born in succession, and their power multiplied. It was in accordance with the principle of the impermanence of water. Finally, he took advantage of the situation and borrowed the sword of Star of Water from Shen Yaohua's body. The water element sword aura roared out like a tsunami. With a loud boom, the sun and moon sword saint was sent flying. However, the embroidered tower was unable to withstand the shock waves from the clash between the 3 sword saints. It collapsed instantly. Sun Lang had used the 4 luminaries, the cycle of life and death, and even borrowed the stellar sword will from Shen Yaohua's body. That was why he was able to defeat the 2 sword saints with a single move. However, this move also gave up the control of the water elemental sacred sword, giving Shen Yaohua a chance to breathe. He landed on the ruins of the embroidered building. Shen Yaohua was also standing not far away. The sun and moon sword sage quickly turned back with an ugly face. "Losers," Sun Lang said, "there are only 3 of you this time. Are you tired of living?" Wei Shihe said sternly, "Sun Lang, we are here to welcome the return of the sacred sword of water. What were you doing just now?" There was a hint of fear in his gloomy eyes. Sun Lang seemed to be stronger than before. However, this wasn't what made him panic. It was what Sun Lang did to Shun Yaohua before. If he wasn't wrong, Sun Lang was taking Shun Yaohua's sacred sword of water. That was the sacred sword. It was the source of their power. It was the foundation of their existence. It was the cornerstone of everything. Yet, it was easily taken away by another person. This was simply too terrifying. Therefore, he repeated, "What were you doing just now?" Sun Lang glanced at him. His eyes were filled with disdain and ridicule. "It seems that you didn't take my words to heart. You're courting death. What can you do about it?" At this moment, there was an explosion in the embroidered building. The Shun family was in chaos. The master of the Shun family hurried over with his men. When he looked up, he saw the two sword sages confronting Sun Lang and heard the words, "We are here to welcome the return of the sacred sword of water." There was an uproar. They looked at Shun Yaohua in disbelief. The body of the young miss who lived at home was blooming with the brilliance of the sacred sword. Chapter 1086. The people of the Shun family stared at the scene in front of them with their mouths agape. Their minds went blank, especially Shun Shixiang. The eyes of the master of the Shun family, who was suspected of selling his daughter for glory, bulged out. He rubbed his eyes hard, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His daughter was emitting a blue radiance that was as bright as the ocean. The brilliant light of the imperial weapon and the aura that was strong enough to compete with the other two sword saints were all telling him a piece of good news. "I, Shun Shixiang, am the father of the radiant water sword saint. The sword saint's family. Soar to the sky. Bring honor to the ancestors. Be prosperous." From now on, he could do whatever he wanted in the imperial capital. Being hit by a huge pie in the universe, his heart was filled with shock and ecstasy. At this moment, he wished he could travel back in time and go back to the past. He wanted to slap himself 180 times in the face for thinking about how to remarry his widowed daughter and sell her for a good price. Idiot, 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 idiot. Fortunately, she did not marry that short-lived guy from the Qi family. Otherwise, the seven luminaries sword saint would be pushed out. At this moment, he wished he could crawl under his precious daughter's skirt 50 meters away and praise the new sword, Saint Qinxing, loudly. The Shun family had a sword saint, which could bring honor to the family for at least 50 years. But he managed to keep it under control, because the situation did not seem to be right. The embroidery tower had collapsed into ruins. This was not a big deal, because his daughter had become the radiant water sword saint. Thousands of embroidery towers could be rebuilt. The key question was, how did it collapse? Because of a fight. He had also heard the earth-shattering noise before, and a servant of the Shun family had provided him with first-hand information. He had seen the two sword saints being sent flying with his own eyes. Judging from a situation in front of him, the person who had sent the sun and moon sword saints flying was undoubtedly the fourth person on the scene. Tianyuan Martial Merit, Fire Sword Saint, Crown Prince's tutor, Shinsei General, and Sun Lang. F*CK, F*CK, F*CK. Why are they fighting? Why are they fighting in the Shun family? Before Shin Shixiang could make sense of the situation, Hikari Kinsei Wei Shiha turned to look at him and smiled. "Mr. Shun is right. I am Wei Shiha." The Shun family was already showing signs of decline, and their social status was declining year by year. Shin Shixiang had not been in a good mood for a long time. When he saw the seven luminaries sword master in the past, he did not even have the qualifications to be looked at directly. Now that he saw the solar sword master smile, his bones immediately melted. After all, everything had happened so suddenly that he had yet to completely change his mindset as the father of the Sword Saint of Water. "Greetings, Lord Sword Saint." Wei Shi has said, "Congratulations, Mr. Shun. Your daughter has been recognized by the sacred sword. She has officially become the master of the water-exalted sacred sword. The Stellar Sword Palace has a successor. Congratulations." This could be considered as gaining the approval of the seven luminary sword saint. Shin Shixiang's body trembled. He said respectfully, "This is the blessing of the heavens, the boundless kindness of the emperor, and the pity of the ancestors. My daughter's beauty has actually gained the favor of the sacred sword. I will not let you down and protect the world. Wei Shihe nodded to show his approval. The Shen family has a long history and is very sensible. No wonder they raised such a daughter. Now that your daughter has gained the favor of the sacred sword and the light of water, shocked the imperial astronomer. According to the laws of the empire, the two of us are under orders to bring her to the palace to meet the emperor. We will also gather the civil and military officials and the Chunxing sword master to announce to the world that she is officially the sword saint. Does Mr. Shun have any objections? The benefits were right in front of him. Once the identity of the sword saint was confirmed, the Shun family would immediately soar. The number of people who would come to curry favor with the Shun family would be enough to break the threshold of the Shun family. This was a great fortune. How could Shen Xixiang say no? He repeatedly agreed, and for a moment, he completely forgot about Sun Lang, who was at the side. Wei Shihe received his approval. He turned to Shen Yaohua and said gently, Miss Shun, since you have gained the approval of the sacred sword, you should take up your responsibility. Your husband, General Chao, was a minister of the palace and fought side by side with us. His soul in the netherworld is still alive. He should be happy to see you wield the sacred sword. Since your father has no objections, let's go. The Empire has gained a beautiful sword master at this critical time. This is good news. With just a few words, he pushed Sun Lang aside and tried to reach a consensus with Shen Yaohua alone. After all, this was the normal procedure. The appearance of a sword master should be brought to the palace to meet the emperor. Then, the officials and professionals would be gathered to verify her identity. Then, the world would celebrate. The seven luminaries' sword saint was the pillar of the empire. The appearance of every sword master was a national event. What will you try to do by obstructing? Furthermore, children should follow their father at home. Her guardian had already agreed. Who are you to object? Moreover, she would agree to it herself. As expected, Shen Yaohua retracted the brilliance of the imperial army. She bowed to Wei Shihe gently and said, I am afraid of a woman taking on such a heavy responsibility. I will follow the decision of the sword saint. Wei Shihe smiled and said, There is no need for that. From today onwards, you are also the sword saint. It was a very harmonious scene. The empire had gained a new sword saint. Hikari Kensei had gained a colleague. The solar sword saint looked very happy. The defense of Hutu was about to welcome a new growth. Very soon, everyone in the world would know that the astral water sword had a new sword master. It was a beautiful woman. Everything was going smoothly, as long as Sun Lang did not cause trouble. Wei Shihe was smiling on the surface. However, he was very cautious in his heart. He focused 80% of his attention on the silent figure beside him. He felt that Sun Lang would not let this go easily. However, he could not figure out what Sun Lang would do. After all, his words were all reasonable. Sun Lang would not be able to find an excuse even if he wanted to stop the new sword saint. Could it be that he wanted to stop the new sword saint from obtaining a legal identity? Could it be that he wanted to detain a sword saint of the empire? What a joke. Even if it was him, he would still have to face the attacks of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court if he did such a thing. While he was thinking about how Sun Lang would deal with it, he saw a flash of fire. General Shunsei raised his sword and slashed at him. Wei Shihe blocked with his sword. The sun and fire collided, and waves of fire spread. He shouted, Sun Lang, what are you doing? Sun Lang said indifferently, You and your sister just attacked me. What's the reason for that? Assassinating an important official of the imperial court is a serious crime. Why don't you just obediently surrender? Damn it, you really have the nerve to say that. Wei Shihe was angry, so he simply shouted sternly, We were just about to pay a visit to Miss Shun when we saw you trying to injure her and do something improper. That's why we stepped in to stop you. What's wrong with that? Sun Lang sneered and said, How shameless. Shen Yaohua and I are old friends. Why would I hurt her? Your sneak attack failed, and you dare to slander me. Is there any justice in this world? Wei Shihe was furious. He shouted, Wang Shu and I saw it with our own eyes. You are brother and sister. You are colluding. Then let Shen Yaohua say it. Okay. Sun Lang stopped attacking and turned to look at Shen Yaohua. He said calmly, your father is old, and your brother is still young. Think carefully before you speak. Wei Shihe shouted, Sun Lang, how dare you threaten her in public? Sun Lang didn't turn his head and said calmly, nonsense. I'm just reminding her that she has an old father and a young brother. There are many more people in this world that are worth cherishing. Don't be blinded by greed and walk on the wrong path. In the end, not only will you not get what you want, but you'll also lose more. Wei Shihe snorted and said, Miss Shun, don't worry and speak boldly. The heavens are clear, and the emperor is in the hall. In this world, I don't believe that Sun Lang can hide the truth from the masses. Sun Lang said calmly, they are not your family. Of course you can make sarcastic remarks. But let me tell you, if anything happens to Shun Shixiang and his son, your whole family won't be able to live either. This was too arrogant. Wei Shihe was seething with anger. Just as he was about to angrily curse, he met Sun Lang's eyes and felt a chill run down his spine. 2 years was long enough. It would blunt one's memory and make one forget the injuries of the past. However, the blunting and forgetting were not permanent. They could revive in one's mind at any time and make one remember it again, making one remember it more deeply. He saw that gaze again. Thus, he began to recall the past. He recalled something. This person was a lunatic, under the gaze of everyone. Wei Shihe subconsciously took a step back. He looked at his sister, Wei Wangshu, the master of the Grand Moon Sword. The brother and sister had also experienced the Battle of the Great Bear Mountain, but their situation was very special. They managed to keep their lives, but the nightmare of fear followed them like a shadow and became the biggest knot in their hearts. Sun Lang was a lunatic. This was a consensus that had been temporarily forgotten, but now it was remembered again. In a flash, the brother and sister had a tacit understanding. This lunatic had probably been provoked by Shen Yaohua. He could do anything, but they could not let him go crazy here. They had a call for help. The power of the sun and the moon spread. The two divine swords were ready. With a thought, the majestic power of the sun and the power of the moon would shoot into the sky. The glory of the imperial army was the best signal. It could not be imitated, and it was bright enough to attract people's attention. In the blink of an eye, everyone in the imperial capital would receive the news. The two sword saints were in a fierce battle. Only when more experts arrived would Sun Lang have some misgivings and calm down. But at this moment, Shen Yaohua said softly, enough. This weak woman stood quietly among the ruins. Even if the embroidery tower that she had lived in for more than a decade collapsed, even if she turned from a widow into the noble and lofty sword master of the Radiant Water Sword in the blink of an eye, her expression did not change at all. But now, her expression changed. From weak and sorrowful, it turned into hatred and resentment. She looked straight at Sun Lang. Why won't he let me go? Why are you threatening me? I'm just doing what I want to do. Please don't get in my way. She said softly, you've been avoiding me all this time. You don't dare to face me. Are you feeling guilty towards me? But I don't need your guilt. I don't want to live because of this. I don't want to be interfered with by you. There's nothing between us. I just want to do what I want to do. Please don't get in my way. Her eyes gradually became resolute. Otherwise, she said, you can just kill me. Sun Lang looked at her silently. Shen Yaohua also looked back at him stubbornly. No one knew what he saw in her eyes. There was only an invisible and cold, murderous aura, and a terrifying chill lingered in the air. Finally, Sun Lang nodded slowly. Okay. For his sake, this is the only and last time I'll let you go. I believe he has nothing to say. He stopped talking and turned to leave. Before he left, he pointed at Wei Shihe and said, you be careful. Hikari Kensei did not want to lose face. He straightened his neck and said, what do you want? Sun Lang said gloomily, F***CK your sister. Wei Shihe was stunned for a moment. Then, blood rushed his face. Logically speaking, they were all sword saints. They were the top figures in this country and even in this world. Usually, Their words and actions were all about the demeanor and style of a master. When had they ever heard such vulgar words? Wei Wangshu was even more shocked. Because of the power of the Tying sword, this woman's temperament was as cold as a fairy. She was the kind of person who would not bat an eyelid, even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of her. Now, she actually showed signs of wavering. In her opinion, Sun Lang was a madman who was not afraid of anything. Sun Lang, who was ruthless but didn't speak much, floated away. Only the crowd was left in a mess. The Sun Moon Sword Saint was silent. No one in the Shun residence dared to speak. After a moment, Wei Shihe used secret voice sending to say something. Don't worry, he doesn't have the guts. Soon, the Shun residence became busy. From today onwards, the Shun residence could be called the Sword Saint's family. This was more important than being the top scorer in the military examinations. But all this had nothing to do with Sun Lang. He looked calm and walked slowly, as if he was thinking about something. Why did you come out just like that? A surprised voice sounded in front of him. Empress's figure flashed out. Sun Lang said indifferently, What else can I do? What do you think I should do? Empress stood in place and waited for Sun Lang to come closer. Then she walked side by side with him and said, The Wei siblings couldn't beat you in the Great Barren Mountains. Now, it's even more impossible. They have a knot in their hearts. You only need to scare them, and they will rush to ask for help. They will make a big deal out of this and call all the influential people in the imperial court over. Then you can continue to do what you're good at. Qi Lianyan's death was a bad move by the emperor. I'm guessing that you secretly killed him and made it impossible for the dead to testify. Not only do the court officials know that Qi Lianyan died mysteriously, but they also found out that a good-for-nothing was reborn overnight and became a sword saint. This was undoubtedly the emperor's doing, but it harmed the interests of many people. Because the emperor privately gave the sacred sword to others, everyone's chances of getting it were reduced. Moreover, if the sacred sword could be used in this way, the other imperial army would most likely be able to do the same. And the widow of the Shun family also gained the favor of the sacred sword overnight. After you made a big deal out of this, you must have wanted to link this matter with Qi Lianyan's death. Then, you would have taken the opportunity to mobilize the court officials to question Shun Yaohua's identity as a sword saint. You would have forced her to hand over the sacred sword and left it for the various forces to fight over. And this is not your main goal. You want to protect Shin Yaohua, right? Empress sighed. Unfortunately, she rejected your good intentions. What do you plan to do? I'll do what I have to do, Sun Lang said calmly. If she wants to die, I'll fulfill her wish. Chapter 1087. If she wants to die, then I'll grant her wish. Sun Lang's voice did not fluctuate and was very calm. It was as if he was talking about a trivial matter. Empress looked at his calm expression and wanted to say something. In the end, she sighed softly. On this matter, she had no right to say anything. She and Sun Lang should have been irreconcilable enemies. Because of the emperor's threat and pressure, the two of them had temporarily united in a delicate state. The degree of trust between them was extremely low, full of estrangement and reservations. They were wary of each other and viewed each other with hostility. They were no longer as close as they were in the past. There were some things that she did not have a right to say, because the death of the Sword Saint of Water Radiance, in the end, was caused by her and the Emperor's scheme, and the grudge between Shun Yaohua and Sun Lang could ultimately be attributed to this matter. But Empress withdrew her gaze, a sense of melancholy growing in her heart. Now that things had come to this, even if her heart was as hard as stone, she could not help but sigh at the impermanence of fate. The relationship between people was so wonderful and tangled and complicated. One person could affect another person, indirectly affect a group of people, and ultimately affect the fate of a country. And, Sun Lang, could you really do it? She silently said, Your way of doing things is still not appropriate. Shin Yaohua is undoubtedly father's chess piece. Originally, he wanted to place her by your side and give you a fatal stab at the right time. But because of the recent events, the Ministry of Finance has been lost. He had no choice but to activate this chess piece in advance to prevent you from removing it. What you should do the most is to control Shenyaohua before Father. At the very least, you should take away her divine sword. Just like what you had planned before, you should make a big deal out of this matter and question her identity as the Sword Saint. Sun Lang said, I have my own ideas. The Empress concubine frowned and said, Now is not the time for you to let your emotions affect your decisions. Since Shen Yaohua has made her own choice, then it has nothing to do with you. You have to be responsible for more people, for those who believe in you and follow you. There are priorities, you have to distinguish them clearly. The battle with the Emperor must be fought with all your strength. Any slack will lead to a fatal outcome. Shen Yaohua is the water-radiant sword saint. Even on the Emperor's chessboard, she has an important position. You should not let her go so easily. Otherwise, you will be helping the enemy. Do you understand? Sun Lang quickened his pace. I told you that I have my own plans. You don't have to worry about this. Empress said unhappily, This is a matter of national security. You can't just do things based on your own feelings. Sun Lang said coldly, What does that have to do with you? General Tensei was stunned. She slowly stopped in her tracks. She had subconsciously blurted out that dissatisfied complaint earlier. A long time ago, she had said this many times. The ignorant and timid young man from the other world had grown tremendously. He had even become a famous general who could lead the battle. He knew the sky demon like the back of his hand. He was majestic in the art of war, and he was full of strange ideas. He quickly stood out from the 6 armies of Tianyuan. However, in the eyes of Empress at that time, commander of Warjia Ing had a fatal weakness. He sometimes seemed very indifferent. After all, he was a young man from the other world. He grew up in a peaceful world without war. He had received a different kind of education since he was young. He was naive and childish. He often did things based on his emotional impulses. He believed that there were some idealistic things in this world, such as justice and retribution. Those were things that Empress had long stopped believing. Therefore, whenever commander of Warjia Ing did something strange in a daze, General Tensei would come over aggressively and scold him. The scolding would often end with, This is a matter of national security. You can't just do things based on your own feelings. And the person being scolded would always respond with an indecent smile and nod repeatedly to show that he had learned his lesson. After that, he would still do things his own way. In any case, he would never repent. But that was a matter of a long time ago. In the past, Jia Ing would only nod and bow in front of Empress, scolding and laugh heartlessly. He would never say indifferent words like, What does it have to do with you? But that was a matter of a long time ago. Empress stopped and stood in a daze. She watched Sun Lang's figure go straight into the distance. After a long time, she laughed at herself. Her smile was full of bitterness. Yes, what does it have to do with me? I was really muddle-headed. Sun Lang gradually disappeared at the end of the street. General Tensei sighed softly. Even though they had turned against each other, she was still the person who understood Sun Lang the most in the world. Just like when she scolded Sun Lang in the past, she already knew that this guy would never repent. Now, she also clearly understood Sun Lang's thoughts and feelings. Sun Lang should be very sad right now. The death of the Sword Saint of Water was a knot in his heart. After seeing Shen Yaohua, he must have hoped that the widow of his old friend could live a peaceful and happy life. But fate made fools of people. Things in the world were often difficult to achieve. Not only did Shen Yaohua get involved in this storm in the imperial capital, but she also joined the emperor's army and stood opposite him. So the ending was already decided. As the saying goes, the merciful cannot command soldiers. As a famous general of Tianyuan, which one of his hearts was not as hard as stone, in order to protect the people who trusted him and followed him, Sun Lang's sword would not hesitate, no matter who the opponent was. So, he might have to kill the wife of his old friend. One day in the future, this meant that he owed a debt that he might not be able to pay back in his life. Empress lowered her eyes and did not say a word. So what if she was sad? So what if she felt guilty? No matter what, all of this had nothing to do with her. She was no longer in the position to comfort Sun Lang, nor was she qualified to support and accompany him. Then Sun Lang, I hope the person you choose is worthy of your trust and trust. She turned and left. Later that day, another bombshell detonated. The Sword Saint of Water appeared. She was the widow of the late Sword Saint of Water. Big news came one after another, and it was too much for the eyes to take in. First, the nation-protecting Sword Saint sacrificed himself to save the emperor. Then, the Shinsei General Sun Lang roared in the inner palace and questioned the emperor. Then, the Sword Saint of Water appeared out of thin air, and the light of Chun Xing shook the Sword Palace. All of these big events were filled with the smell of conspiracy. The first to explode was the Chao family. It was the family of the late Sword Saint of Water, the empire's west conquering general. In the bloody battle in the Great Barren Mountain, the Sword Saint of Water died, and Shun Yaohua became a widow. She refused to be a widow for her husband when she was young and insisted on leaving the Chao family. At that time, it caused quite a big disturbance. The Chao family, as a big family, certainly did not allow it. But Shun Yaohua insisted on it, and the two sides were at daggers drawn and extremely unhappy. In the end, it even attracted the intervention of the imperial court and the Star Sword Palace. After all, as the widow of the late Sword Saint, Shun Yaohua insisted on leaving her husband's family, refusing to be a widow, and showing an attitude of wanting to remarry. If this spread out, it would have a bad impact on the reputation. But the seemingly weak Shun Yaohua exploded with amazing persistence and tenacity. No matter what they said, she would not be a widow. In the end, the Chao family had no choice but to give up. After all, there were many casualties in the successive wars of Tianyuan. The imperial court wanted to recuperate and promote fertility and would definitely encourage widows to remarry. With the imperial court's laws, the Chao family did not dare to openly force Shun Yaohua. In the end, the matter ended with Shun Yaohua leaving with nothing. The Chao family and the Shun family became hostile and never contacted each other again. The Chao family felt ashamed of this and could not bear to hear the name Shun Yaohua. But after all, they lived in peace until today. Then, the Chao family exploded, because Shun Yaohua suddenly became the Sword Saint of Water. F***ck your mother. The divine sword was originally our family's. The Chao family exploded on the spot when they heard this news. The three flames of greed, obsession, and anger burned fiercely. As the saying goes, greed blinds one's mind. The divine sword's benefits were greater than the sky. Thinking of this, even the old lady who prayed to Buddha all year round was furious, let alone the boorish brothers of the Chao family. No wonder Shun Yaohua left with nothing back then and did not remarry after returning home. It turned out that this was the reason. The more they thought about it, the angrier they became. All their doubts in the past were answered, and their minds were filled with only one thing. Shun Yaohua did not leave the family back then, and the position of Sword Saint still fell to the Chao family. Back then, she tried every possible way to escape. She must have embezzled her husband's belongings to become the Sword Saint now. How preposterous! The divine sword originally belonged to the Chao family. This concerned the future of the family for the next 100 years. Even if they had to shed all pretense of cordiality, they had to fight for it. The Chao family was once a Sword Saint's family, and they were also a large aristocratic family. In terms of currying favor, they were much better than the Qi family. They sent out members everywhere. On one hand, they invited the family's allies to help, and on the other hand, they ran outside the imperial city to beat the drum. Their logic was quite simple. Firstly, the late Sword Saint of Water was a member of the Chao family. Secondly, the current illegal Sword Saint of Water was the former Sword Saint of Water's ex-wife. Furthermore, the current illegal Sword Saint of Water, Shun Yaohua, as the daughter-in-law of the Chao family, had single-handedly accepted many of the former Sword Saint's belongings, including his will. After that, she insisted on leaving the Chao family. Her attitude was firm, and she did not hesitate to leave with nothing. Then, 2 years later, she received the recognition of the divine sword and became the new sword saint of water. The conclusion was that this little b** tch must have found something that seemed to be a secret inheritance or treasure left behind by her late husband. Then, she comprehended the secret of water from it and received the recognition of the sword saint. Originally, as a widow, it was not a problem for her to accept her late husband's belongings. However, the problem was that she had left with nothing. How could she use these things to obtain the sword saint of water? This was too shameless. It was equivalent to stealing. It was equivalent to daylight robbery. In short, she had stolen the divine sword that originally belonged to the Chow family. That was the divine sword. F***ck your mother. Hurry up and give it back, you unfaithful b***tch. This logic sounded a little forced, but there was nothing wrong with it. In fact, it made sense, especially in an old-fashioned feudal country like the Empire. Anyway, the Chow family's attitude was very clear. If they could get the divine sword back, it would be great. At the very least, they wanted Shen Yaohua to return to the Chow family and wield the sword of Chun Xing as the widow of the Chow family. This was the biggest concession. Anyway, the Chow family was in the right in this matter, right? However, the people of the Chow family obviously did not realize one thing. In a feudal and backward empire, their idea was very feasible. They even had a large number of sympathizers and supporters. However, the problem was that in a feudal and backward country like the Empire, if you wanted to be reasonable, you had to see if the other party was willing to be reasonable with you. The master of the Chow family, who went to the gate of heaven influence to knock on the gate, was refused entry. The emperor did not want to pay attention to him at all. He sent someone to say that he was unconscious again. The ownership of the sacred sword was related to the future of the family for 100 years. Even the imperial prestige could not be bothered. The Chow family ancestor gave the order, and the entire family was mobilized. There were officials, nobles, aristocrats, and scholars. 5 generations were in the same room. They were fully armed and came to the gate of heaven influence in a grandiose manner. They all knelt down and shouted in unison, asking the imperial family to come out and uphold justice. The emperor said that he was unconscious. The people in charge of the imperial palace were Empress and the Empress Dowager. The 2 ladies had a headache and felt that it was quite tricky. They were not worried about the people of the Chow family, but about Sun Lang's attitude. After the shocking change in the imperial palace not long ago, they finally realized the Shunsei general's audacity and wild ambition. If this matter was not handled well, Sun Lang would use it as an excuse to make a fuss. It would be a very troublesome situation. In a dilemma, the 2 ladies summoned Shen Yaohua and asked. They were all women, and the Empress Dowager was also a widow. They had a lot more in common. They beat around the bush and asked about Shen Yaohua's attitude. They also hinted at persuasion. Since you're the sword saint of water, why don't you give the Chow family some face? It is also good for you to give face to your late husband. Anyway, even if you go back to the Chow family now, they will have to pinch their noses and treat you well. You have the divine sword in your hand. Everyone in the Chow family will try to curry favor with you. Even if you're lonely, you can play as much as you want. They only want practical benefits and will turn a blind eye to other things. That was the general meaning. However, although Shen Yaohua's attitude was very respectful, she insisted on not going back to the Chow family. This time, even the Empress Dowager and Empress were not very happy. They also believed the Chow family's words. After all, Shen Yaohua's situation was very suspicious. An ordinary woman suddenly became the sword saint of water. No matter how they looked at it, she must have received guidance from her late husband. How could you be so heartless? Although they were dissatisfied, they did not dare to say anything. First, Shen Yaohua was the sword saint of water. Her status was noble. Even the imperial family had to treat her with respect. Second, they were afraid that if they pushed too much, they would make the other party unhappy. If Shen Yaohua ran to Sun Lang's side in anger, the scene would be too beautiful. Shen Yaohua's work here was not good, so they had to persuade the Chow family. The general idea was that His Majesty was now in a coma. Something big had happened in the imperial court. The imperial family needed the sword saint of water's power. They hoped that the Chow family would consider the overall situation and not mention this matter. When everything was over, they would discuss this matter again. The Chow family would go home for the time being and take these sweet dates. The imperial family would remember their kindness. Several people in the Chow family said yes, but in their hearts they were thinking, Mother of the Empress Dowager, go to hell. In the past, when there was a sword saint in the family, the emperor had to be polite to us. These sweet dates are nothing. If you don't give us the divine sword, you are cutting off the roots of the Chow family. If you can't protect your family, why do you still want the country? After leaving the palace, the few of them discussed and hardened their hearts. When they were asking for help and gaining sympathy, a big shot in the imperial court who used to be on good terms with the Chow family pointed out a way for them. For this matter, they had to ask Master Sun for help. Since the imperial family was unreasonable, they would leave. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.